It's 3:00. If everybody's ready, we'll get started. Welcome to the City of Jacksonville Beach regular meeting of the Pension Board. It's Tuesday, August 25th. Madam Clerk, can we get a roll call?
Nick Curry.
Here.
Dan Jansen.
Here.
Christine Hoffman.
Here.
Greg Kleffner.
Here.
Eddie Vergara.
Here.
David Cohill.
Here.
John Patrick.
Here.
Matthew Grocki.
Here.
John Costilla.
Here.
Jason Sharp.
Here.
George Candler. John Wiggins.
Here.
John McDaniel. Lance Hewish.
Here.
Steve Shadow. Just as a reminder, you guys, our mics are spaced out a little funny today. That's just because we don't have all of the mics that we need to suit you guys. So it'll be your closest mic to you. You want to tap it on the little red dot to make sure that we can hear you till it turns green. Thank you.
Are you suggesting we share?
That is correct. Sharing is caring in this office.
That's right. Need to get approval of minutes in a second. The minutes of the Joint Quarterly Pension Board held on May 26th, 2026.
So moved.
Second. Got a first and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Moving on to new business, consultants, reports, and presentations. First up, we have our illustrious City Attorney, David Miggett, to give us some words of wisdom on Code of Ethics. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Jansen said, my name is David Miggett. I'm the in-house city attorney here. I know several of you, but not all of you. Thank you all for the work you do for this board. I hope to one day be a vested employee in the general employees pension plan. I do have a separate pension plan from a previous employer under either Chapter 175 or Chapter 185 of the Florida statute. So I truly do appreciate the work you all do. For more so for selfish reasons, but it is for the greater good. So thank you all for doing that. What I'm here today to talk to you all about is ethics. And I'm going to do a two-parter, if you will. Part one is going to be an overview of some of the state ethics laws that apply to you as members of this board, mainly through the fact that you have to file an annual financial disclosure. And then the second half of my presentation will be discussing the city's ethics policy and seeking feedback from you all, not necessarily feedback at this moment because I'm just presenting it to you, but sometime over the next month, if anyone has any thoughts or questions or ideas, I'd be happy to hear them. So let me start with my presentation up here. This is my fourth time doing this in the last 2 weeks, so it's either going to be a well-oiled machine or this is where I actually derail. So bear with me. So state ethics laws. As a member of this board, and I'm 99.9% sure you all do have to file an annual financial disclosure with the state, right? All right. So therefore, the gift law also applies to all of you. And just a reminder, the ethics financial disclosure was due July 1st. I hope all of you have turned it in. If you have not, the state gets serious about 60 days later, so that's next week. So if for some reason you have not filed your annual financial disclosure yet, I would urge you to do it within the next week before penalties could start attaching. So because you guys serve on this board, you cannot, there's a few things to be aware of on gifts. So I actually have it in two different spots in the slideshow. I'm going to talk generally now and then maybe a little bit more specifically when the other slide comes up. So in a general sense, you cannot either solicit, which means ask for, or accept anything of value, a favor or a service, if it's based on your vote, your official action under this board, or your judgment in determining issues that come before this board. If it's obvious or should be obvious, and obvious is not the right word, if it's reasonable that a gift is being given to you to influence your vote on a matter before this board, that would be illegal under Florida law, and thus you cannot accept any sort of gift. There's also a general law, so that applies to you, gifts specifically. And then there's a general law that says you shall not accept, I say general because it also applies to your spouse and your children if applicable. You shall not accept compensation, payment, or anything of value when you know or should know it's being given to influence a vote or official action you would take as a member of this board. Again, these are general ethics provisions under state law that apply to you all. These next two are very similar, the first two bullets on this slide, but they are two different statutory subsections in Florida statutes, so I did a separate bullet for each. But you cannot corruptly use your position to obtain a special privilege or benefit for yourselves or others. Do not go into the country club and say, I'm a member, the golf club, and say, I'm a member of the pension board, therefore you guys need to give me better tee times or discounted tee times. That would be a misuse of public position. And very similar language, but a different section of the statutes is abuse of public position. Very similar. You cannot abuse your public position to obtain a special benefit for yourself or others. Kind of common sense stuff. Let me tell a quick story. I was doing ethics training elsewhere in Florida about 15 years ago, and I put it in a slide with an example of related to these statutory sections, and I used an example of a country club. Don't ask for a membership in a country club. And the reason I put it in there is because some of the materials I was reviewing and preparing from the state had that as an example from like 15 years before that, as someone got in trouble, an elected official. Well, good thing I finished my slides 3 days early and I was preparing them, because the day before an article made the newspaper, one of the local elected officials, not one of my bosses, but another one, got in trouble with the ethics commission related to a country club membership. So I promptly removed that example and used a similar but distinct example. So this stuff does happen. People do try to game the system or use the system illegally. What I'm telling you all is, of course, do not. The last one's kind of the Martha Stewart or member of Congress example. Don't do insider trading or don't do anything that, don't utilize information you would learn that's not available to the general public if you learned it through your role as a member of this board. Again, my intro there kind of leads to what happens. It happens more so with, members of Congress is where you see it a lot, or, but there, you guys do get some interesting financial investment information. So conceivably, you guys could learn stuff that you could use for your private benefit. And sorry, thunder took me for a loop there. That others don't know, and that is illegal under Florida law. So don't do that. All right, these two items are similar again, but they're different items. So I put two different bullets, and they're hard to explain. I struggle to explain these, so I'm going to try to use some examples. As members of this board, these two sections of the Florida statutes apply to you all. You cannot do business with the city because you are a member of this board. So if you own, if you have a company that you own, or you're a managing member of, or your spouse or child owns, because you serve on this board, you cannot do business or enter into contracts with the city, even if it's unrelated to your service on this board. So I looked at some of the solicitations for services the city has out right now, or had out in the last month, and one of them is cleaning services. So, for example, if you own a cleaning company on the side, unfortunately, you cannot bid on that cleaning contract that the city is seeking someone to hire because of this provision of Florida law. The second one is, and let me just reiterate something I kind of alluded to but was not specific about. This would only preclude you if you are an officer, an owner, or a purchasing agent of that company. So if you work for Ajax Cleaners, a publicly traded company, and you're simply, you have a mid-level job with no management decisions or functions, this would not prohibit Ajax from bidding on a city contract. But if you were an officer of Ajax Cleaning in that example, or a purchasing agent, there would be a prohibition there. The second thing is similar but distinct, is you shall not hold any employment or contractual relationship with a business or agency regulated by or doing business with the city. again, tough to explain examples of this. Let me try to think of something. I do have an example written down, but let me try to think of another one. I'm going to go with what I have written down. So, if let's go. Actually, no, I got a new one. I'm going to throw Dustin under the bus here. Dustin cannot start a company or take a job doing private pension review stuff if that company is also bidding on stuff with the city or working with the city pension plans. Maybe not the best example. The one I had written down was more of in a development sense. A city planner cannot take a job doing private zoning consulting work for local property developers in the same city that they work as a planner for. That would be a conflicting employment and contractual relationship. The other example, if any of you ever were a teacher or know anyone that's a teacher, teachers cannot tutor their own students for money, even if it's outside of school hours. That's a conflicting employment or contractual relationship. The bottom line on these is if you ever see something and you think, well, I'm involved in something and something similar is coming before this board, reach out to my office ahead of time, and we would gladly look at it with you, assess it, and see if there's any issues to be aware of or be concerned about. We would also, if prudent, we would call the Commission on Ethics, which is in Tallahassee. They do a great job of being helpful, and they really like it if you call them ahead of time, not after the fact, when there's an ethical issue. So we could hash it out ahead of time and see if there's any issues, see what the best course of action would be for you all to take.
Do you charge for that?
It would be you stole my thunder there. I wasn't quick enough in the response. I can't even accept gratuities for that. So no, it's related to your service as volunteers for this board. So it would be free legal service.
Hey, David, I got a question.
Yes.
Can my son sell insurance to the city?
Likely not, but I would want to review it with you more
Okay.
specifically if it is something that could, if it's not a pure hypothetical and it could something.
No,
could arise.
he's not doing it now, but Brown and Brown bids on it. He works for Brown and Brown.
So, and I'd also I have a good command of this stuff, but I don't have every nuance memorized. Some of these statutes, as I've already kind of said, apply to your spouse and children. Some of them don't. So in Steve's example, if something like that ever arose, just reach out to me ahead of time. We'll go through it.
Okay.
It's much better to go through it ahead of time than after the fact. Since we're going into gifts, we're going into voting conflicts, and then gifts is after that. I'll tell another story under gifts, and after the fact story that wasn't fun. So voting, you all have to vote on matters that come up before you at a meeting, with two exceptions. The second one, I'm almost certain doesn't apply to you all, but you may have seen on TV, or maybe if you worked in other states before, people like to, or at least dramatized on TV, like to abstain from tough votes. You all cannot abstain from something or vote present instead of voting yes or no on a matter. Under Florida law, you have to vote on a matter coming before you, unless you have a conflict of interest. The second one would be in what's called a quasi-judicial proceeding if you feel you're biased. Those are mainly land development matters, so they don't apply to you all. But let's talk about what a conflict of interest is and what would preclude you from voting. So the language in the statute includes a word I always struggle to pronounce, but I'm going to give it a try for like the 300th time in my career now. If the item would inure to your special private gain or loss, that's always a financial thing, or the special private gain or loss of a relative or business associate of yours. Business associate would be someone you have a contract with for some reason, and it's a present sense test. But if you could stand to benefit, so if you work for a financial services company and they want to come before this board for some reason, you would have a voting conflict for certain, and you could not vote. Now, in that hypothetical I just gave up, I just presented, we would need to take a deeper dive to also make sure it is not what I talked about a few minutes ago, conflicting employment and contractual relationships. That could be a second concern we would also have to look into. So not just whether or not you could vote on the matter. The other thing would be, is it a conflicting employment and contractual relationship or doing business with one's agency? Those, and I kind of didn't get into that those could be more serious, where you may have to actually resign your spot on the board or leave your relationship with that other entity. Again, if and when that ever arises, let's talk about it in detail one-on-one, and I'll help you all with that. I'm just trying to give you a general sense, so if something comes up in the future, you're better prepared to identify it ahead of time and reach out to us. If you do have to do a voting conflict and not vote on a matter, there is a written form you have to fill out, and our staff works with you to fill that out as well, and we just have to make sure we file it with the clerk's office, city clerk's office, within 15 days to comply with state law. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about gifts. I talked about, in a general sense, the start of this presentation about, don't do anything if it's obvious or should be obvious that your vote's being done to influence your vote. But gifts in general, as members of this board, apply to you as well. So you cannot accept a gift worth more than $100 from a vendor or a lobbyist. So I apologize, I don't deal with your board that often, so I can't think of a typical vendor that might come before you all often, but they cannot give you anything ever worth more than $100. It violates state law. You cannot do that, and you can never solicit anything from them. In general, that's few and far between, so let's talk about the part of the gift law that more likely would apply to you. Gifts worth more than $100 from someone else. So long as it's not related to your vote on a matter or your service on this board, you can still accept a gift from others, meaning non-lobbyists, non-vendors. But if it's worth more than $100, you actually have to file a form with the state of Florida. It's called Form 9. It's perfectly legal to accept a gift. The state requirement is that you fill out a form. Again, this is if it's not being done to influence your vote, because that's illegal, and it's not being done from a vendor or a lobbyist, where you could never accept anything worth more than $100. So let's say someone wants to give you, a friend of yours wants to give you 2 tickets to a jumbo shrimp game. Face value of those tickets are $25 each. That's $50. It's not related to your business on this board. That's fine, and because it's under $100, you do not have to do anything further. If a friend of you wants to give you 2 Jaguars tickets and they're worth $82 each, that means in sum they're worth $164, and that is a permissible gift, but because you're on this board, you have to file a form saying you received the gift. It's a very short form. You have to list who it comes from, the date it was received, and how much it was worth. And you have to file it. I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds here because I'm a lawyer, but just so it's in the back of your mind, by the last day of the calendar quarter after the calendar quarter in which you received the gift. Again, if you get a gift in the future, I know you're not going to remember these details. Just give me a call. I'm just kind of saying them to throw in the back of your mind. So if someone gives you a gift of 2 tickets to the Jaguars home opener, which will be in September, that's the calendar quarter that ends September 30th. So you would have to file a Form 9 with the State Commission on Ethics no later than December 31st of this year, because that's the last day of the calendar quarter after the quarter in which you received the gift. 2 other little nuances before I move on. This does not apply to relatives of yours. So if relatives of yours give you a gift, you're good. Again, can't be related to your vote on a matter before this board, but in general, you're good. But even if it's your best friend who's not related to you, they give you something worth more than $100, it's good. You just have to file the form. One other exception is, again, I know I'm getting into the weeds here. I'm self-aware of that, but I just want to, point this out, is you could instead pay it down to $100 within 90 days. So if for some reason, this really only applies to politicians. Maybe they don't want their opponents in a future election to see that they accepted gifts, even though it's perfectly legal. That $164 example, let's say the game was on September 20th. if you give that person $64 on or before whatever 90 days is after, probably December 19th, that means you only received $100 of value from that person, and therefore you don't have to file any form. So here's my story. That was like the most interesting gift story I ever got. And I do realize you guys have a long agenda, so I'll keep it short. I had city council members, basically all of them, at a previous job, come to me. Well, they didn't all come to me, but the smart ones did. And I use smart loosely because they came to me after the fact. They all got invited to an event. It was a charitable event, but it was a ticketed event. The Crown Prince of Monaco, that's a very small country in Europe, was speaking in the local area, and tickets were going for about $300 per person. It was a fundraiser for a local charity, and the politicians were all invited, and they all attended. I mean, who wouldn't want to hear the Crown Prince of Monaco? His title was His Serene Highness, not His Royal Highness, His Serene Highness. Just a little trivia there, if it hasn't changed. So I had to work with all these people, and we had about 83 days to figure out what to do, because some of them were thinking about whether or not they wanted to repay the gift. It turns out none of them repaid the gift. They just filed a gift disclosure form. We worked with Tallahassee to make sure, get their guidance and confirm that it was not used to influence their vote. It was not a lobbyist. It was not a vendor. So it was just purely a permissible gift. And we had to work on valuation. And they all filed Form 9s with Tallahassee before the appropriate deadline. So just a real-world example of gifts.
Is it current market value or face value? Because you said right there that current value was 300 and something like that. But
You should have been a lawyer. You're dwelling on the details. It like any legal question, almost any legal question, it depends. If it's and the law may have changed since then. I think part of this law has changed, but what I remember off the top of my head is if it's a typical item, it's the ticket value, like a football game or a Broadway play. But if it's a charitable event, I think it's only the actual cost to provide the services to you for that event. The actual money that's going to charity is not you. It's more complex. Again, just rehashes what I've been trying to instill in y'all is reach out to me when issues like this arise. Thank you for that question. So last thing on state law, here are some of the penalties that could apply to you based on the various laws, based on how egregious a violation is. Impeachment, removal from office, suspension from office, public censure and reprimand, civil penalty not to exceed $10,000, and you may have to pay restitution of any pecuniary benefits received. Any questions on general ethics laws before I move on to our city policy? Okay. If I'm boring anyone, I'm aware of it, and I'm sorry. But this is important yet dry material. So we have a city ethics policy. It was adopted by resolution in February of 2020. That was the only noteworthy thing that happened the first few months of 2020. Nothing else of note. And Dustin, I apologize because our printer was down. I didn't get a chance to look at the whole agenda. Did this make the agenda, this policy?
the resolution is in there.
Are the 4 pages after it or the 6 pages after it?
Yes.
Okay, so you all have a copy of this 6-page policy. And the reason I bring that up is before I go over the policy, let me talk about the timing of review of this policy. On the last page, it talks about and it's letter V number 3, is that our code of ethics shall be reviewed annually by the city council, boards, commissions, and committees, and recommendations received from the review shall be considered by the city council, and that the code of ethics shall be updated as necessary in November of even-numbered years. So this is the first full even-numbered year since I came to work here, and I came across this language. I apologize, we did not review this last year while I was here, but now that I'm aware of it, and so long as the policy doesn't change, I do plan to come back to all of you every year. I did go to the other boards, but I didn't think to come to each of you, so my apologies for that. But I am reaching out to all of the boards to review both this policy and then to see if you all have any recommendations. And again, you may not have any recommendations immediately. That's why I would ask that you email me or email Dustin if you have any thoughts. But I plan on bringing back a summary of what all the boards thought or said or commented on regarding this policy to our city council in October of this year, so that city council can follow the timeline in this policy and update this policy if necessary in November of this year. So a lot of this is common sense. A lot of what's in this policy, and also very closely mirrors state law, which you would anticipate and expect. So I put some of the more important bullets, not that there are unimportant bullets, more of the important provisions, I should say, into bulleted format in my presentation. I'm going to try not to read them verbatim, but a few of them will be verbatim. So I apologize for that. For all of you who have sat through slideshows where everyone just reads every word, you probably despise that as much as I do. So I'm trying not to do that, but I'll probably do it a little bit. So as I said, this was adopted in February of 2020, and it applies to public officials. And that word's defined, so I put it in red on my slides. And that includes our elected officials, our mayor and city council members, appointed officials, which is defined as the city manager and the city attorney, and then the members of boards, commissions, and committees. So this, bless you. So this policy applies to you all as a member of this board. Resolution 6 pages long. It's in your materials. Please read it as you can in the next few weeks. And here are some of the key components. So early on, it says stewardship of the public interest shall be the public official's primary concern. Remember, you all are public officials. Everyone kind of knows what that stewardship word means, but if you're like me, you're like, what exactly does it mean? So I defined it in the sub bullet for you all. It's careful and responsible management, careful and responsible care or control of something that's entrusted to your safekeeping. So not only are you stewards of the pension funds through your actions, but you're also stewards of the public interest as under our ethics policy. So you must take the public interest in mind when you make your decisions as well on this board. So you all have a duty to comply with and uphold the laws of the United States, the state of Florida, the city of Jacksonville Beach, and to the extent you guys have any duties where you carry out these laws, you'll do it impartially while performing your duties. Your conduct shall be above reproach and avoid even the appearance of impropriety. Refrain from abusive conduct or verbal attacks, both against each other, against consultants, against members of the public. Treat them with respect. I know your board probably doesn't get as much heated public comments, although maybe I'm completely wrong. But some of our other boards, there could be, since I didn't know what stewardship meant specifically, I do know what gadfly means. Gadfly is a pest, specifically in a public meeting. Someone who comes up and likes to criticize or be abrasive. And most boards get those people from time to time. Be respectful to them, even if they don't probably deserve it. That's part of your duties under this policy. Refrain from abusive conduct or verbal attacks. Perform your duties in accordance with the rules. Be prepared for your meetings. Focus on the business at hand. You guys probably look at a lot of numbers. If I'm wrong, I apologize. If I'm right, I never want to be a member of this board. So don't interrupt other speakers. Don't make personal comments that aren't relevant to the business of the body. Don't take phone calls during the meeting. I mean, there could be an emergency where you have to, just common sense, step out, come back as soon as you can. Try to refrain from reading or sending texts. The presenter should have your full attention. And don't participate likewise in any other actions that would interfere with the orderly conduct of meetings. Don't use inappropriate language. Try your best. I say try your best because stuff like thunderstorms or accidents happen, but in a perfect world, you're never late for a meeting. So be diligent about getting here on time. Base your decisions on merit and evidence. The next bullet does not apply to you. That's a quasi-judicial action. That's land development matters. So I'll skip over to the next bullet. If you have a conflict of interest, we talked about those a little bit already. Don't participate in deliberations or decision making. And comply with the gift laws that I spoke to you about. A lot of this is repetitive and redundant because it's what's required under state law as well, and I already went over it with you. So don't use private information not known to the public that you learn through this board for your personal gain. The second to last bullet on this slide is more so for like the city council members. They may have letters they want to write from time to time, and there's ethical standards on use of city letterhead. You all should never be sending letters on city letterhead unless this board delegates one of the members to write a letter on the board's behalf. Maybe if there's a pending state pension law, that could be an issue where that comes up. But if you're writing a letter on your own initiative, by all means, you could list in the letter that you serve on a pension board, but you should not be using pension board letterhead if such even exists. If you attend other boards, or if a matter comes before city council, it's similar to what I just said. It's perfectly okay to say you're a member of the pension board, but you should not be insinuating, or actually you should go one step above that. You should explicitly state that any personal opinion you're given is not necessarily the opinion of the pension board. No offensive or inappropriate or harassing behavior, positive and constructive workplace. So, penalties. Any potential violation of the ethics code shall be reported to either the city council, city manager, or the city attorney. In the 6.5 years that we've had this policy, to the best of my knowledge, there has been one complaint, and that came after I was here. Don't try to connect A and B; it wasn't regarding me. So I'm unaware of anything before my tenure. I'm almost certain that's correct, but I apologize if I misspoke. But we've had at least one case. In that case, the city council asked the city manager and city attorney to do an investigation. It was a complaint for actions of a member of a separate board that were not at the board meeting itself. It was interaction with a member of the public. In that case, did I go too far? Hold on. So we did an investigation. I used help from our HR department because they have expertise with interviews, with investigations, and we came up with a factual report of what the evidence indicated happened factually. We did not suggest any penalties or recommend any penalties, but we apprised the city council, who hears these complaints, what the potential penalties were. And these are the potential penalties on this slide. The city council can order a verbal reprimand, a written reprimand, a temporary suspension from your participation in the board, or removal from the board. In the ethics case that I worked under, city council chose to give a verbal reprimand to the person who a complaint was filed against. And then just one other aside, so that person was not removed, but then when their term was up, they were not reappointed. I could have been related to that action, maybe it wasn't, but actions have consequences, and this policy exists, and we expect you all to act with professionalism and comply with the law. I know that's not an issue. It's not an issue with 90% of the general population, but our boards, our committees, we serve the public here, and we need 100% compliance. So, any questions about the city's ethics policy? Okay, we're going to try to drag it out a few more minutes because I haven't bored you all enough yet. No, I thank you for your time. I would ask one more time that you try to take a few minutes to read over this policy. And if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, critiques, send me an email or send Dustin an email. He'll make sure it gets to me. My email is dmigut@jaxbchfl.net. I know I said that kind of quick, but I'm easy to find. And I think I will stick around for the next agenda item as well. I could leave though if Dustin. No, just kidding. So, thank you all. Again, I know it's dry material, but it's an important material, and I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Madam Clerk, for the record, Mr. Candler joined us at 3:15. George, thank you for joining us. Good to see you, sir. Moving on to the next item, discussion of possible action, Jones Walker. Pedro, he's supposed to be here. This is in reference to a separate legal entity opinion letter.
Hey, Pedro. I've got you on speakerphone here with the board. We're, again, as you know, we're struggling with our connection online. We got everything working, and then it is refusing to allow him to join, saying he's not an authorized user for some unknown reason. So here we are, and we're on the second agenda item, Pedro. So, okay. Just to kind of set.
It may have sense there was another attorney, so it's like it's with the city attorney, there's already too many attorneys in the room. So
Yeah, right. Just to kind of set the stage here, this is following up on the discussion from last meeting where there was kind of a difference of opinion between city administration and city policy versus what Pedro had described as us, the boards being separate legal entities and things. And so we had that whole discussion last time, and it was asked for the city attorney to join to review the situation as well. And in the meantime, in between then, Pedro did issue an official opinion letter, whereas before he just kind of had spoke with me and then with the boards about what his opinion was. So he did put it in writing for the city attorney, so the city attorney had something to review. And so now, if we could hear from Mr. Meggett on your opinion on the matter.
Yes, so I'll defer any specific questions about this memo itself to Mr. Herrera. But I think it is legally accurate that, you all are not bound by the city's procurement policy. Nonetheless, I do think it's probably and I know my duty is legal advice, and I try to avoid or wade carefully into public policy advice. But I am going to say, I'm kind of going about as far as I feel comfortable saying that, it's in the best interest of the public, it's in the best interest of the city and you all, and under your duties, kind of similar to that ethics stuff I just spoke about for the last 30 minutes. I would highly recommend that you guys, there's 5 options written by Mr. Herrera, and I do like. I'm not going to recommend an option. I am going to say though, for example, I like the language in option 4. I'm not saying it's my recommendation that you adopt option 4, but you guys should have some sort of policy in place. I would hope that it would closely mirror the city's policy, and that is because we want to make sure we're good stewards of the financial resources, the money that's being expended. Procurement in general there's actually not that many laws, at least in Florida, on procurement. A lot of cities and counties take a lot more action than the bare minimum required by state law to make sure they're good fiduciaries and they take care of the taxpayers' money or wherever else the money's coming from. So along those lines, I did want to put on the record that I agree with his legal conclusion, but I would, caution you against not setting up some sort of safeguards. Sometime in the future, it takes time to develop a policy, but try to stay as close as you can to either the city's policy or best practices of procurement. Dustin, did I miss anything that we discussed?
No, I would just say that with discussion with Pedro that we all had, that it's kind of Pedro's same opinion that we should have something in writing as to what the board's policy is, and not just kind of be operating on a, this time we did competitive bids, this time we did an RFP, this time we didn't do anything, we just chose someone, just to put something in writing. And he did mention that he could provide me with some other plans, policies as examples. And so if that's the route we want to go, I would probably get a couple of examples from Pedro and call around some of the board members, see where everybody's opinion is, and come with a couple of options at the next meeting or something like that, if that's.
I think that's a good idea, but I'd also like to have Mr. Miggett weigh in on it as well once we get a draft up, maybe between the three of you, and that way we're presented with the best option or two options that you think we should go as administrator moving forward.
Oh, let me just add one thing, just because of the words you just said. And I realize, again, this is my first time appearing before this board. I haven't really provided any training to you all, but be aware of the Sunshine Law. It's perfectly okay for Dustin to speak with either any of you one-on-one, but he cannot tell you anything regarding his comments with another board member in private. You all cannot talk to your fellow board members in private due to the Florida Sunshine Law. And again, it's kind of, if this board thinks they need a training on Sunshine Law or public records, I'd be happy to do so, in the near future as well. But you said I could talk to each of you. Just make sure you're not talking to each other. That's prohibited under Florida law, because this is something that'll come before you for future action. You can only talk to your fellow board members in a public meeting. You can always talk to staff. Staff cannot be used as an intermediary to get a message to another board member outside of the Sunshine. Of course, that would never happen, but just a friendly reminder and a caution.
Thank you.
And just
David?
to follow up on that, you could discuss it with, for example, a member of the other boards.
Yes, I was going to ask. So me and John can talk.
Wants to delegate maybe a committee of one or two or three, but it could be discussed amongst the boards themselves. But I agree entirely.
That's right. The little nuance there, it just slipped my mind because I haven't worked with this board, is that we have three different boards right here. Thank you, Pedro.
No, it's all right. No, it's
And just one more technicality, Pedro, is if it were two members of a same sub-board, that can happen. Yeah, right. Perfect. Steve, was that going to be your question?
I can talk to John, or I can talk to Chris, but I can't talk to this John or Lance or Greg.
I
Correct.
can't wait to have some side discussions on pension board purchasing policy. Let's get together for happy hour.
Then you
We'll
guys
do it.
like,
Okay.
bad game of telephone.
So is that the direction that the consensus that you guys would like for me to work up some sort of draft to bring to the next meeting, if not two different drafts? And
Go ahead.
No, I
No.
don't think we need a motion.
No.
Just to be clear real quick, when you're talking about working on one or two drafts, what are you looking at as far as the options down here?
So that's what I was going to talk to everybody individually, like what, because the city policy has, anything above 50,000 being, you have to go out for RFP, and it's like a cumulative number over just what we want that to be for us. If we just need to come up with some kind of specifics for how we want this board to, what instance we do competitive bids and what instance we do RFP.
Why
And
not just mirror the city and say 50,000?
we could. The only,
I just,
as actually sitting over there, the CFO, the only part of the city's policy that gives me a little bit of heartburn is the continuation of. So if we have this GRS consulting actuarial agreement and we set it to go for 5 years and it's 12,000 per year, then that crosses the
We
threshold.
never hit the 50,000 mark, is what you're about to say.
Yeah, because it's cumulative of the life of the contract. So it would cross
that
the
one,
threshold, but which seems,
No,
I don't know.
we don't need to
we'll discuss.
Dustin, I would like to see what some of the other boards have. So if you can get copies of some of the other, not ours, but other
yes.
pension boards, and
And
see what they're purchasing.
I would too, and that's what Pedro's going to provide us. And I have not seen any other boards purchasing policy. And the city's purchasing policy is very extensive, whereas we need something much more.
Right. Not as cumbersome.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, streamlined.
That's what I was just gonna say. The city's doing everything from chlorine to pipes to trucks, and we're really just doing services.
Right.
So it should be a much simpler, so I would really look at what other cities are doing, or other pension boards are
Other
doing.
boards are doing.
to draw from that.
Oh, nice. Okay, I think I have my direction.
So you'll be bringing that up at the next quarterly meeting?
Yes, I'll bring that up at the next quarterly meeting.
All right. Well, thank you, Pedro. Thank you, David and Megan, for
Hard time here, but I think so. I'm going to work with you on. I can get you some policies, some drafts, and we can kind of go from there. Is that
Yeah.
what the board's direction is?
Yes, sir. I think that's right.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Pedro, I'll leave you. I don't anticipate that we'll need you, but I'll leave you on the call if you don't mind, in case something does come up.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries.
As the board, I'm going to step out at this point in time.
it pleases me.
Walked right into that one. Thank you all. I know I haven't met some of you before. You could call or email me at any time with any questions. Thank you.
All right, moving on to a presentation from 50 South. Do you want to give just a little brief overview before we get started on that?
Absolutely. So just really quickly, we have on the agenda two private equity fund of funds. You've do not have anything like this in the portfolio, nor have you heard presentations of this kind before. So in part, it's going to be hearing a little bit about these companies specifically, but I also think this should be educational as to sort of the asset class, how these funds work. And so if you don't have questions, I might try to insert a few questions just to try to give you some understanding, because they're very different from a mutual fund or very different from a Sawgrass type portfolio that you currently have. The other thing I would mention, within the investment policy, we did put in a kind of a section for alternative investments, kind of up to 2.5%, but we have it targeted at 0. So there's sort of a placeholder in the policy as an allowable investment, but something we have not taken any action or moved towards at all. So this is kind of that first step of hearing a little bit more about it. So again, we have these two. So let's, I would encourage you to kind of learn as much about it as you can, and then afterwards we'll have a discussion, see if there's questions and how best to proceed. Any questions of me before we jump into it?
Just a little bit of a point of order, so that they would be able to, if they decided to, make a decision and allocate some funds, and then next meeting we would have to just change the investment policy to move the target to whatever decision was made.
I would actually venture to say I think we could even do the policy today, just as an example. If you said we really like this, we think we should move forward, and we should allocate 2%. Then kind of almost by that motion, you're effectively changing the policy to put the target at 2%. Although in practice, I'll say, when these type of investments, you don't just write a check or send the money in one day. It gets called in over multiple years. And so I'll just use a nice round number. You allocate $4 million. You don't just all of a sudden put $4 million in the target, because it'll take a long time to get there. And so we kind of have generally a sliding scale where a year later, you're kind of 0.5% or 0.75% in, and that comes from equity or wherever you take it from, and then it moves a step closer and a step closer. So by the third year, you're kind of fully at that 2% or whatever that target is. But within the policy, we have it set up as a sliding scale.
2.5% is 3.75.
Roughly. Yep.
And that meets the minimum of everybody we're going to hear from today.
Correct.
Would you like for me to grab them now?
If there are no other questions, are we ready to go ahead and jump with 50 South? Okay. Then, yeah. And you have the 50 South presentation as a part of your stack. The Taurus one will come in when they come in. actually, I'm going to go ahead and turn this on for you.
Okay, great, thank you. Good afternoon. How we doing?
Good.
Good.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Do you want us just to go ahead and start, or should we?
Please go ahead and jump right in.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having us here this afternoon. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to tell you a bit more about our Private Equity Core Fund 12. I'm Ashley Allison. I'm a director on our public fund team, so I work with public funds throughout the South and Southeast. And I'm joined by Brad Dorsness, who is a co-founder of 50 South Capital, also heads up our private equity team there. So I thought it'd be great for you to hear from Brad directly today. I'll go ahead and start on page 2, if that's okay. Just wanted to highlight the work that we do with public pension funds across the firm. So this is highlighting both Northern Trust and 50 South Capital, which we'll get into a bit more. Brad will touch on the connection between Northern Trust and 50 South Capital. But we do work with over 240 public pension funds across the country, 15 public plans within Florida itself. And then we also amplify that presence. We have 16 offices in Florida and over 600 employees in Florida as well. So certainly a strong presence in Florida and a lot of work that we do with public funds across the country. So I'm going to hand it to Brad to dive into an overview of the firm and get into the fund a bit more. Please feel free to ask questions throughout and interrupt if you want something, you want us to highlight something or have a question, please feel free just to jump in. And we'll also make sure we leave time for questions at the end as well.
Great. Yeah, so if we could turn to page 3. So let me explain a little bit about exactly what is 50 South. So we are the private equity and alternatives arm of Northern Trust. We're a wholly owned subsidiary, so we're fully integrated into the business of Northern Trust. We just have a different brand name for the alternatives practice that we manage. Not sure if you know much about Northern Trust. It's a really, really big financial services organization. We have 65 offices in 15 different states here in the U.S., offices in 22 different countries, and we are part of the asset management business that has 1.6 trillion in assets under management. Northern Trust has about 23,000 employees overall. And that's one of the advantages that we have against our competitors is the fact that we're part of this really big organization that has a lot of resources that we're able to benefit from and leverage as we invest the fund. And that can be, the various offices, the employees, the network, the equity research department, the economists that we have, the IT organization that helps us assess venture capital investments. So we're very lucky that we have all of these resources at our disposal to help us make the very best investments on behalf of our investors. Speaking of that, on page 4, this is our investment team and the broader 50 South Capital team. So as Ashley mentioned, I'm the co-founder of 50 South Capital. I've been doing this for 25 years. And the one thing that I've realized is that there are thousands and thousands of private equity funds in the world that we need to meet, interact with, assess, and invest with. And you can't cover all those potential investments with a small team. You have to have a big team that can go out into the market and meet with these firms and establish relationships and really differentiate us. It turns out that many of the funds that we want to invest with, they don't need our money. They may try to raise $300 million and they may have $2 billion of interest. So we have to have a big team to be able to meet with these firms, spend a lot of time with them, establish relationships with them so that they say, we're raising a new fund, we really like you, and we want you to invest in our fund. So the top 2 rows here is the 28 people on the investment team. We're actually adding a couple more. So really we think about our investment team as about 30 people. And these are the people that are focused on buyouts, on venture capital, secondaries, and co-investments that are meeting with these managers and assessing the various investment opportunities so that we can make the best investments. And then we have a lot of people that are doing compliance, legal operations, investor relations, finance, and the like. But that's the big takeaway here is that we're very fortunate we have a big team that can cover all the investment opportunities that we see. On page 5, I'd like to highlight three things as you think about, making a potential investment in private equity. So today we're talking about our private equity core fund 12, and this is a continuation of the strategy, the core strategy that we followed ever since day one. And really our strategy in this core fund is the same that we've had for the last 25 years, and that is it's a diversified approach, so you get exposure to many different areas within private equity. But our job within each of those subsectors of private equity is to identify and invest with the very best managers. So you get diversification, which protects on the downside, but then if we're good at picking the best managers, you can outperform on the upside. There's strong alignment of interests. Regardless of who you invest with, we believe that interests should be aligned. And by what I mean by that is the investment team, we personally invest in the fund as well. So for our investors, every time they have a capital call where they have to make an investment and invest capital into the fund, we get our checkbooks out and we write that check out of our pocket as well. So we're all aligned in making sure we have the very best investments. And then finally, low fees. So we have a very simplified fee structure that I'll wrap up with at the end. We only charge a management fee. It's very simple based on the amount that people invest. Some private equity firms charge a carried interest, and what that is a share of the profits that they take for themselves. For instance, if they charge a 5% carry and you invest $100 in the fund and the fund is worth $200, they actually take $5 out of that $100 gain and they only give you $195 and they keep $5 for themselves. We don't charge that carried interest. We simply charge the management fee. We think that's the most fair way to treat our investors, and that's a big part of our approach to the fund. So you can see here then on page 8. So how have we done historically? So just level set, and I think Brendan's probably educated you on this, but an investment in private equity should outperform public markets. And historically, private equity is outperformed by about 3 to 4% on an annual basis. So if public markets historically have generated an 8% return, then private equity firms should be generating 11 to 12%. So then if you look at this net IRR column, you can see how our funds, our previous funds under the similar strategy have performed. The newer funds are at the top, the older funds at the bottom. We're very proud of that outperformance that we've shown in that net IRR column and the consistency, regardless of market environment, that our funds have shown. Then another way to look at private equity performance is this net TVPI column. This is a cash on cash return. So for instance, if you look at the very bottom at Fund 4, the TVPI there is 2.6. So if someone invested $1 million in the fund, that $1 million is worth $2.6 million. And that's just another way to look at it. We generally try to generate a return of 2 times and above. We try to double your money in our funds. And again, as you look up the column, you can see some of the more mature funds have achieved that. We even have one that's tripled our investors' capital. And then the newer funds at the top, they slowly kind of march to that 2x. But we're really happy with how those newer funds are performing and how they're progressing towards that goal. And then just to wrap up performance on page 9, so I'm going to talk about on the next page, but our core fund is separated into 2 broad buckets: buyouts and venture capital. Buyouts are just acquiring older private businesses, usually from their founder. Venture capital is investing in startups. And those are the 2 core buckets of core fund 12 that I'm discussing here today. And so I just wanted to show how each one of those sub-strategies has performed. Again, we're really proud of the consistency. And, over time, you can see that, various times venture capital maybe has performed a little bit better, other times buyout. But we're really proud of the consistency and the steadiness that we've shown in both of those strategies. So page 11, let me talk a little bit about what exactly is in Private Equity Core Fund 12. Well, if you look at I'm going to focus on the pie charts. If you look at this, the one on the far left, strategy, 75% is allocated to buyout and buyout fund managers and types of investments, 25% to venture capital startups. The middle pie chart is showing 65% in primaries. That's where we invest in new funds that then those managers go out and buy companies over the course of 3 or 4 years. Secondaries, that's where we buy interest in private equity funds from other investors, usually at a discount. And then co-investments, that's where we're investing directly in portfolio companies alongside our managers. And we do these 3 types of investments, again, because it provides really nice diversification and various ways to enhance the returns of the fund. And then geographically, the vast majority is here in the U.S., but we also invest a little bit on the buyout and venture side in Western Europe. We have a very comprehensive and rigorous investment process. I showed you that page of 28 investment professionals. Everyone's voice is heard along the process. We have a team discussion with those 28 people 5 times amongst ourselves before we finally make an investment. So it's a very robust and thorough investment process. We have a lot of good minds around the table that have a lot of good input onto how those investments, whether we should make them or not, and that's served us well. I'm going to talk about venture capital very quickly. Why is it essential that you have investments in venture capital in your portfolio? Really, venture capital, when you think about it, is a bet and an investment on technological innovation. And in this country, in the 25 years that I've been doing this, it has been amazing, the technological innovation that we've seen, and we've been fortunate to be able to invest behind a lot of that. There's a number of portfolio companies on this page. I think the best example is Zoom Video. All the way back in 2012, we committed to a firm called Emergence Capital Partners. It's an early stage venture fund. In 2014, they were the initial investor in Zoom. 2014, Zoom started growing quite a bit. It actually went public in 2019 and was trading about $90 a share. Emergence invested when it was only 87 cents a share. So they made a huge return when that company went public. And then COVID hit. And we all lived on Zoom for a couple of years, and the stock went to $4.50. And so we sold most of the stock and realized our investment in Zoom Video. But that just shows the power of early stage venture capital investing. We invested with a firm before any of us knew that we were going to be, how essential video conferencing was going to be on the internet. They invested at 87 cents, and we generally got out at around $400. So venture capitalists are always trying to invest ahead of what's next. AI is a big area today. We were invested. We've been invested in that for quite a while. Many of you have probably seen that SpaceX went public at an over $1 trillion valuation, which is just mind-boggling. Our venture funds initially invested in SpaceX all the way back in 2014, 12 years ago, before anyone really knew how big that company would be. So we're really fortunate to be partnered with some of the very top venture capital managers like Andreessen Horowitz and Founders Fund and Excel that are out there investing in these startups way before anyone knows how big they can ultimately be.
So what's the difference between that and a small growth? A new company coming in, aren't they coming underneath small growth or growth?
Yeah.
So it is. So I don't see the difference in what you're doing and what a small growth fund is.
Yeah. So really, venture capital is these companies are like at the inception stage when they don't have any revenues yet. I think typically small growth is when they've grown, they've started to have revenues, they've started to have some momentum. They're maybe 4 or 5 years old, and then the growth investors come in and say, wow, this company is growing quite a bit. I want to invest and help it grow even more in the future.
So this is before that.
So this is even before.
So in your Zoom example, it would have been $100 a share, 98 cents.
Right, exactly. And there were plenty of growth investors that invested at that point. Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about buyout as well. I think page 15 is maybe the best place for that. So we invest in middle market and lower middle market buyout funds, really the smallest funds and the smallest segment of funds in the market. What we mean by that is there are funds out there that raise 200, 300, 400 million, and they're there are buyout funds out there that raise 25 billion. So it's a huge dispersion of size. We like the ones at the smallest end because there's the least amount of capital and there's the most amount of companies. And when you have that mismatch, there's a lot of inefficiency in that part of the market. And so we focus on the lower middle market on the buyout side because, you know, that's where we think we can generate the best returns. And we showed you earlier that, you know, we're very, very proud that we've generated really consistent returns in the buyout space using this strategy. I don't necessarily have an example of that, but many of the fund managers in this space are buying companies from founder-owned businesses. So somebody starts a business, they grow it, it turns out to be successful, the owner is just pulling out dividends every year. Maybe the owner gets to be an age where they want to retire. They don't want to pass it on to their children, so they want to sell it to private equity. So private equity firms are able to buy those businesses, and oftentimes they don't have to pay the lowest price, because if you're a founder and you started a company and you're going to sell it to someone, this is your life's work, and you really care about who that is. You're not necessarily only going to sell to the highest price, but you're going to sell to somebody you trust and who's going to take care of your employees and grow the business. And so oftentimes these lower middle market buyout funds are able to acquire businesses for below market prices. So that's why we focus there. The last thing I will also add is that, you know, I mentioned that we also add in secondaries and co-investments. That's going to be about 30 to 35% of the fund. And these investments help the fund get out of the J curve quicker. It helps the fund start to generate positive returns much more quickly. And we think it's overall accretive to the overall strategy. So I'll just wrap up last couple pages on page 16. You know, we mentioned that back to fees, you know, we only charge a management fee, and you can see here in the middle of the page, it's tiered based on the size of commitment that that our investors make. We have a good partnership with Mariner that we take all of their clients and aggregate them such that that, you know, once they reach over the 20 million, which I think we have, all clients get over, you know, the benefit of the lowest pricing tier because we're able to aggregate all investors that come through them. So that's one thing that we've had a good, you know, approach with, I think, over the years, and we're happy to share that with you. So I ran through things really quickly, but, you know, happy to take questions. I guess just to wrap up on page 17, you know, we've been able to gain access to some of the most elite, oversubscribed, invitation-only funds in the market. That's been a result of the large team that we have to be able to go out into the market and build relationships with many of these fund managers. I talked about the fact that we focus on lower and smaller buyout funds and early stage venture funds. We leverage the resources of Northern Trust to be able to get into these funds and use the network that we have of all the offices and the presence and the equity research. One thing I didn't mention is we do invest in a relatively concentrated number of managers. That's about 15 to 18 buyout fund managers and about 14 to 15 venture fund managers over about a 2 to 2.5 year period. We think if you invest in too many managers, returns will decline, but we want to make sure we provide enough diversification that you know, we're not taking too much risk. On that point, I will add that over 25 years, we're very proud to say that not a single investor has ever lost capital as a result of investing in our funds. And we're hopeful that the strategy that we put in place, that will continue in the future. And then I talked about diversification. So, yeah, I think I covered everything. It was very quick. We're happy to take questions, but thank you so much for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you for your time. There's questions for Bradley? Anyone?
One, you talked about the low expense ratio. I'm sorry, you talked about the low expense ratio. That's your expense ratio, though. There is underlying expense within the PE funds.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And all of people like us, we have to pay them their fees. It's typically 1 to 2% management fee, and then all of those underlying funds, they do charge a carry of about 20%. But again, we only charge management fee, but we don't charge the carried interest.
Taking you back to page 8, can you just give me the Super Reader's Digest as to how you decide which fund strategy you're going to choose to?
Say, what's the question again?
On page 8, you have a list of all these different fund strategies. How do you decide which ones are going to be, and that you guys are going to be?
Oh yeah. So these are. I should have been more clear. These are our. This is our track record. These are our funds
Okay.
that we've managed and the track record that we've generated all the way through Fund 11, and then this new fund that we're raising now is Fund 12. But
Okay.
your question is how do we decide which funds to pick? That kind of gets on page 12, and I think again there are thousands of funds out there. It's really hard. In venture capital, the funds that we tend to invest in, it's kind of a barbell. There are brand name funds that have a lot of successes under their belt. Those are the ones that are really tough to get into, but we've been doing this for 25 years and we've eventually gotten access. For instance, Andreessen Horowitz is a big name. A lot of people know who they are. If you're starting a company and you have a chance to work with Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, who've been very successful in helping other startups go public, you want to take their money. So they have an unfair advantage. They have that brand recognition of attracting a lot of good entrepreneurs. So that's one thing we look for. And then on the buyout side, I think there's a lot of undifferentiated buyout funds in the world. We look for ones that have one element of differentiation. One of my favorites is a firm called KPS. This was started by an individual who is the son of a steel worker who was in a union, and his dad basically, the company went bankrupt. His dad helped engineer the union to basically buy the company out of bankruptcy. So he has that in his DNA, and that's the strategy that his fund has, is to buy these heavy manufacturing steel automotive companies, but they're very union friendly. Most of the time private equity and unions kind of butt heads, but not this firm. Very union friendly. He works to save jobs, and that's just a firm that's, again, highly differentiated that we've partnered with.
Page 8 is just to be, I think, page 8, you basically have one fund at a time open, and then you raise money for that fund.
Correct.
Then close it, and then
Yeah.
funding's closed. Now 12 is open.
I see.
Yeah, we raise our funds about every 2 years. We make commitments to underlying fund managers over that time, and then they take about 3 to 4 years to go buy the companies. And then once we've made all those commitments, we kind of let them do their work, and then we go on and raise a new fund over the next 2 years and do the same thing.
Very good. Thank you.
Could you just expand on that real quick, just sort of the real high level life cycle of the fund? You kind of mentioned the investment period, but what does that mean in terms of the full investment kind of life cycle?
Yeah, so there's really 3 phases of a private equity fund like ours. I mentioned, so that first part, we're making commitments to underlying fund managers. We make those commitments, then they invest. So that's, we make the commitments over 2 years, they invest over 3 to 4. So that first 5 or 6 years is when your money is actually being invested in the companies. Then the middle part of the life of a fund is when the private equity fund managers are working with these companies to help improve them, help grow them, help take them public, whatever it may be. And then towards the end of the fund's life is when they start exiting and selling them. And so that usually takes 12, 13 years.
The whole cycle.
Yeah, the whole cycle.
So our commitment on this would be 12, 14 years,
Correct.
just open-ended though. Whatever it takes, it takes.
Yeah, it can only be wrapped up when that very last portfolio company from the very last fund. But it's a cash flow through vehicle, right? So your cash is going in the early years, and then it's coming out in the back half of the fund's life. And again, that's how generally most of the other peers of ours, that's how those funds are structured.
So we just have to manage that. When that comes back out, we have to have other stuff ready.
Yes.
Other investments to put it into.
Correct.
They would be glad to get you in. It's 15 at that point.
Well, and that's what most people do is they have
Yeah, they roll.
they have a lot of cash flow modeling, which I'm sure you've done, that kind of map out like, because eventually what you, in the early years of a private equity program, you're constantly putting money in, right? And you're sitting here saying, when is it coming back? When is it coming back? But then when it comes back, it more than pays for the investments that you made, and it's cash flow positive. You have to be patient. It does take 6-7 years to get to that point. But once you get to that point, the whole private equity program is cash flow positive, where it's like, hey, we're putting in $10 this year, but those early investments are kicking back and distributing 15. So we're net positive 5, and then it just continues on as it goes on.
What's the reporting look like? What's the timing on reporting? Because we have, like, say, fiscal year end of September 30th. How long out would it take to get end of fiscal year numbers for us? And stuff?
Yeah, it's generally the quarterly reports come out on about a 1-quarter lag, and then the year-end reports they come out. I think they have 180 days, so you would get those, middle of the year. The reason why the year end is a little bit longer, and it's not in sync with your fiscal year end, but the calendar year end, these funds go through audits. It just takes a longer period of time.
So
that's why it's
maybe I can help with that too.
Yeah.
I get a lot of audit requests from my clients, which we take care of, and we can send them the financial statements. I've never really experienced an issue with a client when they need information for their audit. We've always gotten them what they need, so feels like it hasn't been problematic yet. And obviously I have a lot of public funds. Fiscal year ends are usually 6:30, 9:30, not 12:31, so that's fairly common as well.
So you can get us numbers for the audit within some sort of reasonable time frame as
Yes,
what
I've never had a client come to me and say it was a major issue getting them what they needed for their audit. So
All right. This is what I took away from what you said a minute ago, and I'm probably wrong, but from the conversation went on, we're not going to see a return on our money for 6-7 years, where we're making 8% now.
You'll see a return. You won't see the cash. So what happens is, the investments are being made, and really every quarter, the investments are revalued. So it's like, hey, we bought this company for 100. This quarter, it's worth 104, and then it's worth 108, and then 112.
We don't start drawing that till down
So
the road.
you'll see it on paper,
Right.
and then, again, the typical hold period for a private equity firm, they hold their companies 4, 5, 6 years, and then they sell it, and then you actually get the cash. So on paper, you will see the return. The NAV of your investment in the fund will go up, and that'll be reflected overall. So, but that's different than when you actually get the cash back from when those businesses are sold. I mean,
If we have to sell them early, what happens?
You don't want to. You'd have to go to the secondary market, and typically, if you're doing that, you're selling at a pretty big discount.
But you're not putting your money in all up front either. So if we make a
It's trickled in.
$3 million commitment, it'll go in. Basically, it's like capital calls.
Yeah,
And you're committed to $3 million, and it'll go in
so
half
you
a
put in
million
about
first quarter.
10% in year one, about 15% in year two, and then 20%, and then it trickles down from there.
There's quarterly valuations that they'll provide us. So
But I think it is important to understand. You put money in the S&P 500 fund, you see it go up in value. Effectively, at the push of the button, it's liquidated and it turns to cash if you want out. Private equity funds, you can't do that. You can go to the secondary market and try to sell your interest in a fund, but you're typically taking a pretty good haircut in order to get out of that position.
And so if you look at page 8, you can see that, our more recent funds, so Fund 11 was a 2023 year vintage year fund. That's when we raised that fund, so it's 3 years old. It's got a net IRR of 23%, and that TVPI multiple is 1.2. And then you can kind of go down. So you can see that, after a few years, they do start ramping up. But that's just on paper. And then, then the distributions come a little bit later.
Are your fees charged on the committed or the invested capital?
They're charged on committed capital.
Okay.
Basically, the fees that I showed you are an average. And the way the fees work is it's based on what you would commit, and there's a concept of a base fee, and it starts kind of low and it ramps up and then ramps down. What we did just for ease of use is just to show that average. All private equity funds generally charge on committed capital, because if you charged on NAV, the private equity fund managers themselves are the ones that are assessing and determining NAV. So they could just say, well, the NAV's really high, and it turns out we get high fees off of that NAV. So this just says, keep it simple. It's just based on commitment. You can't manipulate that, and you know exactly what your fees are going forward. I will say that, again, the returns that I showed on page 8 are net of our fees. So it's inclusive of that. And again, we think our fees are very competitive, and the gross return, net return spread is very narrow because of that. So that's kind of how it works.
Do you find that your firm calls typically all of the committed funds, or is there some left over?
We do. The underlying funds that we invest in don't. They maybe only call 90 to 95%. So what we do is we overcommit a little bit to account for that. But in the life of a fund, what typically happens is you get to about year 4 or 5, and we've called maybe 70% of your commitment. And you start getting distributions back that you can just, or we just offset. So if various models that we look at, you may only have to come out of pocket 70 to 75% of whatever you commit, because by the time you get there, those distributions pay for the remaining 30%. And then you get all the distributions after that.
Okay. But the life cycle of the fund, we would be paying the fees on the full committed dollar amount, correct?
Through year 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
But not probably initially, like if our first $1 million goes in, we're not paying on 3, are we?
No, you're paying on the full commitment.
Yes.
Oh,
If you're
that's
paying
what
on the
I
full
wanted to
commitment,
If you've committed $5 million and it takes them a year just to call 500,000, you're still paying
On
the
5
full
million.
fee on 5 million.
Okay.
And that in an essence is where the J curve comes from.
Right.
Because you're paying fees on the full commitment with almost no money in the ground,
Right.
and therefore no earnings. So you've got this negative performance because you're paying fees for no investments. And that, so your value goes down, and it takes a while for those investments to actually start turning into value, and then you come out of that J curve. We can talk about that.
But in year 8, when the NAV has doubled, we're still paying the fee on the committed capital, not the NAV.
Exactly. Correct. Yeah. And I can get into more detail. In their book, they give you the average. In our book, we give the kind of the year by year breakdown, because it scales up and then scales down. So as you get into those later years, the fee rate changes. The 44 is the average, but it's not all the same. And so if you want to go to it in my little summary book that you had last quarter, page number 11. So I'm on the top of page 11. It starts at 45 basis points, goes up to 60, and then by year 10, you're down to 39, and by year 13, you're at 25. So it kind of goes up a little bit and then scales down. So, and this is an important thing to consider too. If their largest fee percentage was at the end, they'd be incentivized to keep the money in the fund, right? Their greatest fee percentage is early on in those years and then starts to go down. So they actually have an incentive to sort of get you the money back, so then you can recommit and reinvest, as opposed to just keep it in there forever earning that fee. Okay. Yeah, but I think that is the important thing, is we're charging on commitment. The dollars in are below commitment in the early years, but then the NAV grows more than that in the later years, so it does eventually balance to that average that we've shown in the deck. And that all is reflected in those net IRRs and returns that we show on page 8. So that's what matters to you is the net returns, and we think the impact of that fee is minimal.
Any additional questions?
Nope. I think we're ready to move on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions, and we'd love to work with you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Are we good to keep going, or do we need a quick break?
Yeah, I think we're good to keep going. If anybody needs a break, they can just take one on their own.
For us to help you hand out the books. That's okay. Okay. Quickly get these out. Eric, maybe I'll call you and we'll let you hand them over. Thank you. Skips that way.
They're buying companies.
Yeah, true.
What they don't want is pull that extra. So we should have.
I thought they would be there.
They're buying. Yeah, well, they're going to fund the funds.
Yeah, we'll make sure we go.
So this one, not a fan of that either. The money trickles.
Yeah, see this one. Okay. Private equity fund.
Same thing, yeah.
So since there are three of you, I'll kind of lend you my microphone just so you have, a couple to choose from. But otherwise, we'll go ahead and.
Yep. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm going to let Brendan take the lead. Go ahead, sir.
Well, yeah. With that, we've already heard the one presentation, so hopefully they're warmed up. But let's go ahead and jump right in, and we'll just kind of throw out questions as we go.
Okay, great. Well, let me start by saying thank you very much for the invitation to present this afternoon. Very much appreciate the opportunity. My name is Kevin Campbell, joined by two of my colleagues, Eric Wilkins to my right and Mark Eisner to my left. Eric and I are the two co-founders and managing general partners of Taurus Private Markets, and Mark is a managing director on the business development team. Taurus, there's a way background. We're a private equity fund of funds. We're going to talk a little bit about what it is that we do and kind of how we approach our investment strategy here over the course of a couple of slides. We're based out of Malvern, Pennsylvania, so we're in southeast Pennsylvania, about 45 minutes outside of the city of Philadelphia. We have just 5 pages to go through with you today, so please feel free to stop us at any time if you have any questions. So why don't we start on page 1. So top of page 1, with regard to the fund, we are in the process of raising a private equity fund of funds. As I mentioned, this would be our third private equity fund of funds. We have a target fund size of $225 million. We've been fortunate to have had really good support from existing and some new investors as well, to the point where we've raised $285 million to date, exceeding that target. As I mentioned, we've had really good support. 10 different investment consulting firms have actually placed clients into the fund. And the investors in this fund look very similar to investors of prior funds, right? And so it's public pension plans, Taft-Hartley plans, insurance companies, and also family offices as well. With regard to public pension plans, we have public pension plans in Pennsylvania and Georgia, Louisiana, Michigan, and then also here in Florida. Actually, over the course of our firm's history, we actually have 41 Florida-based public pension plans as investors. So we've had really good support in the state of Florida. With regard to the target return for this fund is similar to each fund that Eric and I have worked on together, which the target return here is a 17 to 20% net return and a 1.75 to 2 times net cash-on-cash return. So if we do our job right, we'll double our investors' money and produce a sort of high teens to low 20s type of net return. That's what we're looking to do. With regard to the team, Eric's going to talk a little bit more on the next page with regard to the full layout of the team, but Eric and I have now both been in the business for a little over 25 years. Eric started in private equity in 1998. I started in 2001. But more importantly, we've been working together and executing on the same strategy going back to 2010. So for 16 years now. With regard to investments, we focus exclusively on the smaller end of the private equity market. So if you were to think about us like a public equity manager, you could think about us like a small cap public equity manager. Reason for that is it's an area of the market that's the least efficient, that's produced the best returns, and we think will continue to produce the best returns. And that's where Eric and I have spent the overwhelming majority of our careers. But we'll talk a little bit about our investment strategy as we go through. And then with regard to alignment, we look at alignment kind of two different ways. One is we want to be supportive of initiatives that are important to our investors, right? And so I mentioned we have 41 public pension plans in Florida that are investors. So we're active members of FPPTA and have been active members of that organization since we started. We signed the NCPRS Code of Conduct at the very inception of the firm as well. And then because of the relationship with the groups that we have out of Florida, we've agreed to fiduciary compliance with Florida statute section 112.661, which I promise that's the only Florida statute that I'll quote during the presentation here today. The other way we look at it is just in terms of just making sure that our document and our fund structure is fair with investors. So for us, and Eric's going to talk a little bit about this with regard to for Mariner clients, but Mariner clients pay on average 42 basis points in annual management fee, which is a pretty significant discount to the rest of the market. Kind of average for the market somewhere between 75 to 100 basis points, and so 42 basis points is a pretty significant discount. And Eric will talk about how we get there. And then there's also significant personal investment by the team, right? So Eric, myself, and Mark, and a number of others on the team are putting personal capital into the fund, and so every investment's important. I make the joke that I have one daughter that just graduated from college in May, and I just dropped another one off a couple weeks ago, so it kind of has to work with paying off those bills. But anyway, that's it for page one.
Great. So if you turn to page 2, talk a little bit about the team. As Kevin said earlier on the first page, we both have about 25 years of experience in the asset class. Yeah, I started in 1998 working for Ernst & Young. We did mergers and acquisitions, advisory work for private equity firms. They would drop us into different companies, and we would do a bunch of forensic accounting work before they would go out and buy a business. Kevin started in 2001 when he co-founded a venture capital investment firm. So we've been doing this for a long time. This is the 7th fund that I'll be responsible for managing. This is Kevin's 12th fund that he's responsible for managing. As he said, we've been working together since 2010. That was at our prior firm, DuPont Capital Management, where we were responsible for managing a portfolio of $3.5 billion worth of private equity investments. We did that for a number of different clients, the largest of which was the $17 billion defined benefit plan of the DuPont Corporation. So we managed it for large corporate pension plans, but we also managed it for other investors too, public pension plans, other corporate pension plans, Taft-Hartley plans, endowments, foundations, family offices, and the like. So really, we've been doing this business for quite some time now. At DuPont, Kevin was the head of the group. I was a senior member of the team. Kevin sat on the business committee, the investment committee for the broader, larger organization for the $17 billion defined benefit plan. So really a lot of experience in terms of managing these types of investments. We were really responsible for doing all aspects of the business and at the prior firm in terms of finding investments, diligencing investments, monitoring, executing, exiting. We're responsible for investor relations, for logistics, and really anything that has to do with the private equity business. We are joined today with Mark Eisner. So Mark's here. I'll let Mark introduce himself.
Thank you. Been with Taurus 5.5 years, almost 6 now, and prior to that, I was with the city of Daytona for 27 years. A retired lieutenant. What's that? My dad was a fire, and there's a story there. I'll have to get it. So, 27 years on that, and 23 of those years, I was the chair of the Police and Fire Pension and the investment committee. In 2014, we had a meeting similar to this, and we looked at putting our toe in the water for private equity. Made our first private equity investment. Fund size was very similar to you guys, what you're looking at today. Did an investment with Kevin and Eric and had some really, really strong returns. 2020 came about, an opportunity to go to work with them and tell the Taurus private equity story, and I jumped on it. And it's been obviously, really positive things since, over the last 5.5 years. I just, again, want to thank you guys for inviting us in. I know the first presentation and these kind of go on, and so I'll turn it back to Eric and we can continue on.
First hot seat question. What was the percentage of your fund, at Daytona Beach, how well funded were you?
We were in the 80s when, probably, high 70s or right in the mid 80s. Fund size was similar to yours. We started off toe in the water, about 5%, and it takes a little while to build up. I'm sure Brendan will explain that to you. But today, I think there's probably 9.5%, 10% of the portfolios in private equity. But yeah, we started just a kind of a toe in the water to make sure that the board really understood what was going on with the way private equity worked and all that. But yeah,
thank you.
Great question.
So yeah, look, this is our team. We're thrilled to have Mark join us. We like working with people that we've known for a long time, but this is exactly how we were constructed at the prior firm when we were managing $3.5 billion. So our philosophy is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we've got a nice team that with good continuity. Yeah.
So we turn to page 3, talk a little bit about investment strategy and also portfolio construction. I mentioned we're a private equity fund of funds, right? And so if you look at the left-hand side of this page, 85% of our capital goes towards primary fund commitments. So we're investing into private equity funds. Those then private equity funds are tasked with the idea of going off and finding attractive privately held companies to invest in across a bunch of different sectors. So we'll invest with 15 to 17 private equity managers over a 3 to 4 year period. When those 15 to 17 private equity managers are done making investments in the privately held companies, our portfolio will have exposure to about 200 to 250 underlying companies. And so one of the things I think a lot of our investors have liked is the fact that they get really good diversification, right? You're getting diversification by private equity manager, by industry, by geography, by time as well. And so it's a nice way to build out the private equity portfolio. We're only investing in the U.S., and so we're only investing in U.S. dollar denominated investments as well. So we're not taking foreign currency risk. We're also not taking some of the international risk that might go along with the international geopolitical risk. You can see that we have a breakdown there of kind of 80% of what we're doing is leveraged buyout, 10% is venture capital, 10% is private credit. The common theme among these 3 different investment strategies is that all of these groups are investing in these companies for the idea of growing these businesses and making them larger companies. And again, we're focused exclusively on the smaller end of the market. So just to give a little bit of background on each of these strategies, if we start with the leverage buyout, that's 80% of what we're doing. These are mature, privately held companies. Often they've been around for 30, 40, 50 years. These are typically family-owned businesses that have significant sales, annual sales and annual profits. So these are companies doing $100 million a year in annual sales and maybe $10 million a year in annual profits, where the husband and wife who have been running this business, maybe it's been a family business for a couple of generations, they're now in their kind of mid-70s and say, hey, it's time for us to kind of transition the business away. And they have children that just grew up in a very different lifestyle than they did, right? Where one wants to become an investment banker and the other one's auditioning for American Idol, but neither of them want to run an industrial services business in Memphis or wherever it might be. And so they look to private equity and say, hey, we'll sell 75% of our business. We'll keep 25% of the business. We'll keep relationships with customers. We'll sit on the board. We'll do all these things and make sure that there's good continuity, but we're just not going to run it every day. And the private equity firm will come in and say, hey, you have 3 salespeople, maybe you should have 10. You've got a location here, but maybe you should also have a location in Charlotte. And so they'll pull a bunch of levers that allow the company to grow and invest capital to be able to expand, with the idea that they would hope to own these companies for 4 or 5 years, and then likely they would be sold to the next owner, which would likely be a competitive group that would come in and buy that group. When we're looking at leverage buyout firms, we're looking at groups that can generate kind of a 20% type of net return and at least a 2 times cash on cash return. That's kind of the requirement for us when we're looking at a leverage buyout manager. When we're looking at venture capital, these again are privately held companies. These are less mature companies than what I gave you in terms of the leverage buyout example. These are typically technology companies and healthcare companies. These are companies that are high growth, very large markets, high growth potential. Good example that some folks probably have heard of. Is everybody familiar with the company DocuSign, electronic signature business? So that was a company that was in our portfolio. Venture capital firm was one of the first investors in DocuSign, invested in the company, sat on the board, helped the company grow. When DocuSign went public, their investment of $17 million turned into $750 million. Not all of them turn out that way, but that's an example of one that a lot of folks have heard of. Whenever we're looking at a venture capital manager, we're looking for folks that have produced at least a 25% type of net return and somewhere between 2.5 to 3 times cash on cash return. So we're looking for a little bit higher performance there because of the risk associated with investing in some of these smaller kind of startup companies. And then when we're investing in private credit, think back to the example I gave you with regard to leverage buyout. Again, these are typically short-term, 2, 3, maybe 4-year loans to some of these mature privately held companies. So maybe there's a family-owned business that says, we want to build a new facility in Charlotte, North Carolina, but we're not really ready to sell the business yet. So we're looking for sort of a shorter-term financing to help us do that. And so a private credit group would come in and provide that loan. In private credit, we're looking for groups that can generate kind of a mid-teens type of return and maybe a 1.5 to 1.75 times cash-on-cash return. I give you all that background on the type of return profiles because that's how we're getting to our 17 to 20% return and kind of doubling our money. That's the way we're doing it.
I appreciate that. I can understand what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, that's it. I mean, it's the common theme is that these are all companies that are looking for capital and guidance to grow, right? And think about the private equity folks on the leverage buyout side and even the venture capital folks. Oftentimes, these are folks that operated companies in a specific industry, and now they're at a point where they're an investor, and they've really transitioned from player to coach, right? They're basically like, hey, look, I ran 3 manufacturing businesses. I know what that's like. I know how lonely it is to be the CEO of those companies. I know the challenges. I know the people that are involved. And I've also sat on the board of 15 companies of when I made investments. So I can coach you through it. And usually, the better companies in the private markets have an ability to choose who they want to partner with. They want to trust those people, get along with those people, want to work with those people, but more importantly, feel like those people can help them build these companies. And so that's what they're doing. And so that's exactly how it works. We're always that's what we're looking for. On the right-hand side is 15% of our capital goes to co-investments and secondaries. A co-investment is simply this. It's sometimes a private equity firm will find a really interesting company to invest in and say, hey, we want to buy 75% of this business. But in order for us to do that, we're going to have a little bit more capital come alongside us. And so it's an ability for us where we get an invitation to go and look at an individual company rather than into a fund and do our own diligence with regard to that company, but then also kind of piggyback on the diligence and homework that the other group has done and make the decision as to whether or not we want to invest directly in these privately held companies. And so over the course of a 3 to 4 year period, we'll invest in 15 to 17 private equity funds and call it 8 to 10 direct investments into privately held companies ourselves, which gives us that portfolio of about 200 to 250 companies.
Great. So if you turn to page 4, we'll talk about the terms of the fund. We set out to raise about $225 million for Taurus Private Markets Fund 3. Today we sit at about $285 million of raised capital from existing and new investors. We're really pleased with the interest we've had and the uptake. Fund 3, same terms in Fund 3 as we had in Fund 2, same terms as we had in Fund 1. We're pretty simple people. It's a fairly plain vanilla structure as far as private equity is concerned. We've worked with each of your plans counsel before. They've reviewed the documents and for a number of other mutual clients that we have. So I think he would probably echo that. We differentiate ourselves through alignment of interest. We do that a couple of different ways. Kevin talked about, hey, we all put a lot of our own capital right alongside. your capital. So you stroke a check into the fund, we stroke a check into the fund as a team. Our senior team are all investors in the fund right alongside you. So we've got skin in the game. We believe in the strategy. And we believe in ourselves, and so that's one way we align interests. The second way is through management fee, and we charge a lower management fee, I think, than most of our competitors. I think Kevin talked about that at the beginning of the presentation. We've got a management fee schedule here on the page through a fourth line down. Years 1 through 4, we charge on 80 basis points on committed capital, and then thereafter we charge 60 basis points on invested capital, and then 30 basis points on invested capital. That fee schedule there works out to about 50 basis points on average over the term of the investment. We have an arrangement with the folks at Mariner. They're very persuasive, where the Mariner clients get a fee break, where their clients only are charged fees for 6 years of fees, which has the impact of dropping that 50 basis points down to 42 basis points. So, we think that's a good alignment of interest. So that's one way that's the other way from an alignment of interest perspective that we look to sort of set ourselves up with our clients. We view these fees as a loan from the investors so that we can operate the business. We return those fees in the distribution waterfall of the fund. So those fees all go back to the investors, and so we want to keep those fees as low as possible so that we can repay that loan that's clicking away at an 8% preferred return to the to the investors. So that's kind of the differentiation for us compared to, I think, the market is that lower fee perspective.
And then page 5, just simply say if you all were to decide to make a commitment to the fund, and we certainly hope that we would be your points of contact. We like conversations with investors. We have pretty regular interaction with our investors, whether it's about what's going on in the private equity market, what's going on with the firm, what's going on with the fund, what's going on in the broader markets. We enjoy it. We try to make it easy for folks to get in touch with us. You can see we've provided email addresses, office phone numbers, personal cell phone numbers, all that sort of thing. And so we openly invite that type of dialogue. But with that, wanted again, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Know that you all have a number of different things on the agenda today, and so appreciate you all making time to have a conversation. Thank you. Clawback provision is kind of a standard thing in a private equity agreement, which essentially is an insurance mechanism that makes sure that the private equity firm doesn't take too large of a percentage of the profits. It's essentially like an audit of the process to make sure that profits are shared fairly between the investor and the private equity firm. Yeah, and so it's a legal provision in there that basically says this has to be reviewed at a certain period of time, and this is a legal item where exactly right.
Investors get their money back.
Exactly right.
That's it.
Exactly right. And occasionally you run into private equity firms that don't have that, and it's usually telling.
So for your fees,
yep.
During that commitment period, we would be paying the 80 basis points on the committed capital. After that period, we would drop, and that would be the net invested capital.
Exactly right.
Okay, and then over time until we hit that, Mariner wall,
right,
that they beat out of you. We would continue with that net invested, meaning any distributions would be deducted from that amount, correct? From what we're charged fees on.
Yeah, so Dave, you're exactly right. So typical private equity fund has a structure where it's a 10-year structure, and typically what you'd see is a group would charge management fee based on committed capital during that entire 10 years. We charge management fee on committed capital only during the investment period, with the idea of okay, we're actively out there trying to invest the entire fund during that period, and so that's why we're charging it. For us, we then transition to net invested capital after that, and the reason for that is because as investors in private equity funds ourselves, we say, hey, wait a minute, if we make a $10 million commitment and we're in year 9 and we've gotten all of our money back except for $500,000. Why are you charging us a management fee on $10 million? Right? That doesn't make any sense to us at all. So that's the net invested capital is essentially the calculation of what active capital are we managing on your behalf. To your question about the Mariner piece, it's a 10-year fund, and with regard to Mariner clients are only paying management fee for the first 6 years. For the final 4 years of the fund, they're paying no management fee at all. So regardless of whether money's been distributed, hasn't been distributed, whatever it might be, it's just zero.
Now, it was brought up in an earlier presentation, this carried interest.
Mhm.
So that would be kind of a you do better when we do better percentage that is taken when the capital is returned.
Yeah. So
after any gains that we would see.
Yeah. So the way that carried interest works, you're exactly right. It's we don't receive any carried interest at all unless the investor has gotten all of their money back plus an 8% annualized return.
Okay.
And then there's a profit sharing that happens. 95% goes to the investor and 5% goes to us. An important point, and Eric made this, was not only is it the dollars that we've invested, but it's also dollars that were used for fees and everything else at the 8% return. So when Eric mentioned that our management fees at that point are considered a loan, is because we have to return that money back, whether it was used for investments or for fees, plus an 8% return annualized before we get to a position of carried interest. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's the alignment, right? The alignment is basically for us. Let's have our management fee be as small as possible so that the loan is as small as possible so that we can repay it, because we feel like, hey, if we can generate a really good return, we'd rather get paid by sharing in the profits rather than just charging a management fee.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Your target fund size was 225.
225.
You're at 280 now.
285.
At what point is it too much, or we're closing it? How are we handling that?
Yeah. So, and to provide some context, our second fund was a $212 million fund, and so this fund had a $225 million target. We are actually having the final close on this fund at the end of September. So I think that this fund probably ends up somewhere between the 284 where we are today and probably $300 million. We feel very comfortable about where we are there. When we were at DuPont, you had a $3.5 billion private equity portfolio. We were investing $400 million a year there. And the one thing that you realized was that there is such a thing as having too much money, because you couldn't be as selective as you wanted to be, right? And so we'll look at 500 or 600 investment opportunities a year, and we'll do 5 or 6, right? And so if we have a $300 million fund, we can be really, really selective. And so what I think you'll see for us, like when Eric and I started the firm, we sort of said, hey, look, we want to be a smaller firm. We want to be a smaller fund, because I think that allows us to be really selective. It allows us to be really nimble, and it allows us to be really picky about what it is that we invest in. And if you do that, you can hold the bar really high for what kind of returns you're going to get. If we had to make 25 investments a year rather than 5, we would have had to go outside of the U.S. We would have had to lower the return threshold. We would have had to do all that stuff. So we're purposely keeping it small. And so, as we think about kind of future funds, they're going to be kind of similar in size to where we are today. That's what we want.
Any other questions for Kevin, Eric, or Mark? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you. Lieutenant, thank you for your service, by the way. And,
thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
And just for the record, the police officers understood everything you said.
The answer to your question is, I didn't do well in the smoke.
You can't blame me for going to Fletcher now.
I'd rather go so short than far around in the smoke where I can't see. No, that scared me away from me.
What's funny about that is usually nobody understands what Mark says. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Perfect. All right, thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Good to meet you.
right now, I'll let you take it from here.
All right.
Quick question before you get, and I apologize. Is there a reason the third firm
that's presented in our book wasn't here.
They were just, so in the book last time, they were in the book, and so I just brought it back as sort of a comparison if you wanted to be able to compare that one against the other one that you were shown that, or that is available in the marketplace. Let's just, as an example, if you thought the fees that you heard today were unreasonable and you wanted a third comparison, that's all.
Appreciate that.
Just a quick point of note. You heard kind of from Taurus right at the end. Their fund is only going to be open for another 45 days or so. So if there was interest in pursuing them, you're kind of up against a clock. You couldn't say, let's table this for 3 months, talk about it next time. See, if you, Taurus, it's kind of a now or, at least for Fund 3, now or never. If you weren't interested, obviously you have more time with 50 South or with other fund options. But that particular fund is closing.
For me, in my simple mind, they look like completely different platforms. But I would like to hear your insight on the two of them as them both being presented. One seems a little bit more long term than the other. And
You're talking about 50 South?
yes,
Being longer term? A little bit. We also have sort of inside baseball from Mariners' perspective, a little bit of knowledge on Taurus. So typically, when a private equity fund starts, we're not going to be all that supportive of a Fund 1, right? We need to see how it does. In a Fund 2, like you usually don't have a good idea of their track record until you're 8, 9, 10 years out, right? The difference was one of our researchers that joined us about 10 years ago was the real estate researcher inside of DuPont. So he was sitting in the meetings with Kevin and Eric as they were part of the alternatives team managing the money. He left, came to, at the time, Anco, but Mariner, to become our research team, or researcher on real estate, roughly the same time that they decided to roll out and start Taurus. So our analyst David walked over to the private equity team and said, "Look, I know these guys technically don't have a track record. They're coming up as new, but this is essentially going to be their 7th fund doing this. They've been doing it for 10 years before for all this money. You really should take a look at it." And so it was sort of an interesting kind of confluence of events to all that to say, even though Taurus doesn't have an extensive track record, Kevin and Eric doing the same thing at their prior firm. They can't come here and advertise that performance, but we had somebody sort of inside that said that could kind of say, you really, to our private equity researchers, you really should take a look at this.
they kind of hinted towards their experience, but
yeah,
and you feel comfortable with them. I'm confident.
We feel very comfortable about it, but I think you do see the difference.
Sure.
They are much smaller team, and they're making a smaller number of investments. They kind of they're trying to be targeted, and they're dealing with smaller checks. Where 50 South is a much larger fund, broader reach, and they're certainly a broader team, but they're also having to make a lot more investments. So a little bit of a scale difference, but at the end of the day, we would expect fairly similar results. Don't see dramatic differences one way or the other. We've had investors, investing with both firms for many years. Both have been happy, or those investors have been happy with the results. One of the things that I think sometimes can be telling, but I thought both did fairly well. Sometimes private equity, those type of they can be very unapproachable, or they just come in and they just tell you how great we are and you really should hire us or else, or that kind of a thing. I think both of these shops are very accessible, engaging, and easy to deal with. So from that standpoint, I think that is a positive. Both of them are happy to come give updates and report to you on a regular basis, or sometimes, if you're not investing $100 million, they don't really want to spend time on you. But both of these groups are very good.
It's hard not to ignore the management fee structure as well, especially you're talking the first 6 years you're paying on it, and then after that it's kind of golden for you, right?
Well, but you're going to pay the carried interest, which they can call whatever they want, and that's a fee. And it's probably about equal
again, you're right. It essentially the targeted returns are roughly the same. One is lower management fee, sort of consider with the no carry, except it's uncommitted the whole time, and that's it. The other one, arguably a little higher fee initially, but then it falls off at the end, and then you've got the carry. At the end of the day, depending on how they return, one will be a little bit more or less than the other, but on average, they should be pretty similar.
How about the underlying fees that we talked about with 50 South compared to?
It's going to be the same. It's going to be the same. And again, those are baked into the results. You know, it's the net number they're talking. The cash back to you, not the gross number before the underlying investor or anything. That would be the final number.
So how if they're the same on fees, basically, how should we be making this decision?
I mean, I look at some of these. I don't want to call them alternative products because I don't think that they're alternative, but I think at least this board, has always kind of side with, I don't want to call them a boutique firm, but the firms that are more sized for our pension fund. You know, we look at the real estate firm. We went with a firm that had a product offering that fit our needs as a board. I'll tell you that I think that a subsidiary, wholly owned, whatever, that's going to take every single dollar that they can get and invest, I think they're going to be driven by different goals than a firm that can do what we needed to do for the same fees and a similar structure. Personally, I think on paper their fee structure is very similar, although apples, oranges, shared, and everything else. That's the way that I've always seen, at least the police fund, sort of lean. Sorry, no, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I mean, our firm has done due diligence and recommend both strategies. Again, if one of them was targeting 25 and the other one was targeting 15, I think we could talk more about what fits better, what's more of it. But again, they're both incredibly similar, and again, on paper we expect the same results, and they both have performed as expected. You know, again, 50 South, we can go back and look 20 years back and see how fully harvested, finalized funds have done. You don't have that history with Taurus yet, but the first two funds are tracking the way we would expect them to kind of be on target to get to that sort of 2x sort of multiple. So again, a little bit less history, but doing exactly kind of what we would expect of them. So again, all that to say, a lot of similarities, net performance essentially the same. At that point, I think you're just kind of going a little bit towards the fit or the strength. You know, do you like the idea? There are some boards that really like the idea of being part of a huge organization that has hundreds, if not thousands of people, right? And others, that's a complete turnoff, and they like the idea of a small, defined, you know, sort of small group that's going to be accessible. And that's not a right or wrong, that's just the difference. Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, one of the common sort of knocks on a smaller firm is that, well, if they don't have a ton of dollars, they don't have the influence or the access to the investments. That sometimes is, you know, the large firms will say, well, look, we have so much money, we have access to the best managers out there because we've been working with them for 20 years and they kind of reserve us space. Well, what I would say is Taurus also, although they're small, they kind of do have similar access because of their history. The way private equity generally works, if you've been doing this for 20 years, every couple of years, you're going back to a lot of the same companies that you've been partnering with for the last 15 or 20 years. And so they were doing this with DuPont when they were writing much larger checks, they still have access to those same people they've been working with, even though the checks are a little smaller. No, but correct. There is a little bit of that, but again, if you just took a brand new, started from scratch with $100 million private equity fund of funds, they're not going to have the same access as right. But I will, again, to sort of defend, if you will, Taurus, because of their background, they have more access and exposure than you would think from a company that only manages $500 million.
Steve, go ahead. Steve touched on this. If you invested in both these companies with the same amount of money, 5 years from now, would you expect the same 2x, or one's way farther out than the other?
No, I mean, from the initial stage, you'd expect the same.
Okay.
Will one of them be ahead of the other at year 5? Yes. I just can't tell you which one.
Okay. It seemed like 50 South is a way longer playbook than Taurus was. It seemed like in their presentation.
Yeah, I think that, a little bit longer in terms of their investment cycle and everything, but it's not a significant difference.
Okay.
Because, 50 South is just possibly going out to 12, whereas Taurus is 10 plus 3, right? So, just a few years here or there.
Right. Okay. And again, if everything goes the way it should in these funds, when you get to year 10 or year 11, you're talking about just the residual tail. If you make a $5 million commitment, you're not talking about a $7 or $8 million investment that's hanging out there at year 10. You maybe have $500,000 left or something. You've already received, hopefully, all of your $5 million plus close to twice or plus another 100%, and then you've just got a residual little bit that they're still trying to exit. But again, that's not to get too far down in the weeds. That's a big conversation for people that get into like the TVPI or the DPI distributions to paid in capital versus net capital. Like if you give them $1, right, and somebody gives you $2 back, that's a 2x. But if they give you the $2 back on year 1, that's a much different IRR than if they give you your $2 back in year 12, right? Same dollar of gain, but one of them had to hold it for 11 years. The other one only held it for 1. And so sometimes that can a little bit play a factor. But again, they're both targeting the same thing. But until you get into the investments and then start to see how they start to exit, you can't really know what that's going to really look like, other than you project based off prior. But again, every fund is different. Every environment is different. You certainly could do both.
I kind of feel bad for Dustin. Twice the work.
On the other side, twice the number of capital calls. Well, and here's the other thing to consider, and it was kind of referenced in one of the presentations. My suggestion would be if you get into private equity or any of these private investments, it's not a one-time investment and then let it go. It's a program. So you make an you make a commitment, and then that money gets invested over, say, the next 4 years, right? So at about year 3, you look again and you make another commitment. So then year 5, 6, 7, 8, you're also making investments. And then you do it again. And then by the time you get to year 6 and 7, the capital from the first fund is coming back. It's paying the capital calls for that second fund. And so you want to consider the layering. If you hire too many or do too much all at once, then you potentially limit your future, rounds of investing to kind of keep that rolling over, so to speak. Again, so all that to say, yes, you can, but you might want to consider just doing one so that you have more room to do additional investments in the future.
But you're basically saying don't do the whole 2.5% in one shot. If we're going to do 1%, and then 3 years later do another percent, and then 3 years later do another percent?
Yes, except the weird technicality, they even said it, like you typically only get 70% called in, and you often, because of the way the early money gets called in, invested, and then starts to get distributed, like you don't often ever get to like that 2x multiple. You don't see that on paper. So it's not like you commit 1% and then 4 years later, 2% is showing up in the statements. You never get there. So you'd actually commit a little bit more than that, if that makes sense.
Well, it sounded like how he was talking about, this guy was talking about they started out the 2% or whatever it was, and then eventually kept raising because of that. The same, now they're at 9% or 9.5% because of that same reason.
Yeah, the more you know it, the more you're invested, the more you like it. Maybe you say, okay, I don't want to just stay at whatever number you start with, 2%. Say, I think this is performing really well. It's actually beating these other things. Let's increase it from 2 to 4 or whatever, right? And just they continue to add to it. But again, every plan has to look at liquidity requirements and all of those things that can factor in.
Is this literally the whole team?
Mm-hmm.
About 550 investments, so before them decides a year or two to leave, it's 30% investment team. It's gone. It's one of the things.
Yeah. Again, for what it's worth, they're picking the private equity companies or the investors essentially, and then those investment companies are picking the actual investments. So it's a manager of managers or a fund of funds. But yes, to your point, if now here's the other side. With a JP Morgan or a regular investment fund, those are ongoing decisions. So you want that team to be in place because they're going to be making the decisions hopefully for the next 10 or 15 years. In a fund like this, you're only making investments for that, call it 4 years. After that, that's kind of done. So even if Kevin and Eric both decided to retire, sort of their management of putting the money to work and diversifying it is complete. So it's not like having them involved in year 8 matters much. And quite frankly, that's why they're willing to say, look, we're not even going to charge you management fees because they're not really doing any work at the end. It's just the harvesting period and letting those businesses be sold and what have you. Then they open the next fund and start charging because that's when they're doing the work to put the next round, in play.
And there's probably more likelihood of attrition in a larger company than in a smaller one.
Yes.
You guys are the owners. They effectively have to sell their company.
But to that point, if there's 4 people making the decisions, if one leave, it's 25% of that group. If you've got 30 on the team and one leave, it's a smaller hit. But how do I say it? It's not a concern to us in particular. Again, because of the way I mentioned it, it's, from an implementation standpoint, it's really like a 4-year fund. Even though the fund runs longer than that. So if there was a major change in personnel during that fund period that came out with the next fund, we'd probably be having a different conversation.
All right. Moving right along.
Any particular or additional thoughts, questions at this time, or should we jump into the quarterly? And
would any consideration of this fund of funds come under the rebalancing part of the agenda?
Yeah, I mean, okay. It certainly could.
Why are we going to make a decision today?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a mute point if we don't make a decision today.
On the one, you're not going to get in.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, that was my point. I just wanted to make certain that we weren't moving on without.
Well, and I could be guessing here. Tell me if I'm wrong. But in a few minutes, we're going to talk about rebalancing potentially. And if you're taking the money out of the portfolio somewhere, part of that could be where does it go? And that could be a possible motion to say, I think we should take some of that money. Although I'll say it's on paper only, because you make a commitment, it's going to take months before that money actually gets called in.
Yeah, that was I wanted to hear just overall the fund and then talk about, look at where we're at, overweight, underweight, before making any decision on the fund of funds.
Are we going to do private equity? And then which one are we going to do? Is everybody in agreement that we're gonna do it?
I like it.
I think so. I mean, it's for some of the newer people on the board. We've been kicking it around for years.
We have.
Just as Mark said, just as his board dipped their toe in, I think that we've gotten to the point where the pool's there. We should dip our toe in to see it as a, further vehicle for our investments.
And I also like the fact that if we're facing a rebalancing action, that we go ahead and look at a choice for that.
How do we get a feel for who's leaning which way on which fund? You guys wanna take like a straw poll or what?
I don't.
I don't think there's any rules against us. You can all openly discuss who is favoring which fund and that kind of thing. There's nothing because it's an open forum. I mean,
Who likes Northern Trust?
oh, I'm sorry, Pedro likes to chime in here. Go ahead, Pedro.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was just echoing your comments and saying that it's a public meeting, so you guys can freely discuss whatever you like amongst yourselves, amongst your own board, collectively. So there's no issues on that front. I was just sorry about that.
No, you're good.
So I saw one hand for Northern Trust. Who likes Taurus?
I just like bigger.
I'm flexible on both ways. I like them both. I just feel like with the 50 South, it's a little bit more of a time frame investment. That's the feel I get with it by a couple of years. So I think that's the only drawback for me as far as 50 South is concerned. I like them both. I'm indifferent on either one of them.
I'm indifferent as well. I definitely see us doing one and then coming back in 2-3 years and doing the other. But it seemed like everybody kind of leaned towards Taurus. So
Yeah. But I think we should probably hear the quarterly report before a motion is made so that we get a better feel for it.
No, I agree with the straw poll. Do we want to do it and who with? To at least kind of get that out of the way.
And just for what it's worth, Taurus raises money. They go away for about 18, 24 months and they come back. 50 South is essentially always in the market. They're raising until they close. And once they close, they open the next one. And if you go one first, you'd always have access to the other. Obviously, if you did the other way, you'd have to wait for an opening. Now, again, there are also other funds out there. It's not like these are the only two. You certainly can explore other options.
Well, I think if we're going to do both, obviously with the short window on Taurus, that would be the one we want to entertain first with that 45-day window. Right.
Okay, so I'll jump into the quarterly. You have the hard copy in front of you. I'm going to try to go through very quickly, but do want to highlight a couple of quick things. This is the June 30th book. It's already dated. But if you go to page number 4, upper right-hand corner, this was a wonderful quarter in the markets. Essentially everything equity related was up double digits. Just to reset, we came into the year expecting cuts in interest rates. We had the conflict brew in Iran, which is obviously ongoing. That caused a lot of disruption in February into March. So that was not a great quarter end. Not a whole lot has changed other than the market sentiment really right around the 1st of April. Things kind of turned around. Enthusiasm resumed over AI. And so we wound up having a fantastic quarter. And again, this ends our 9-month number of the fiscal year. So again, just real quickly, 15% of the S&P, the ACWI ex-US International was up almost 14.5, and fixed income was also positive. Just really quickly, page number 11, I mentioned interest rates. So the gray line, I'm in the bottom right-hand corner, Treasury yield curve. Just a picture here. The gray line, we came in the year, you see that kind of 1, 2, 3 year in the middle part of that curve is below the left-hand side. So on the 1st of the year, the market has priced in cuts that were coming, right? Then everything happens in February, inflation, oil prices, all alike. Fed hasn't taken any action yet, but now we finished June 30th at that blue line. So you can see in the middle part, again, that kind of 2 and 3 year range, almost a 70 basis point increase in yield, as now the market is pricing in hikes in interest rates certainly not the cuts that were there previously. So a pretty big change within 6 months, even though the Fed has yet to actually do anything. Page 14, quick review of the plan assets relative to kind of our bogey and cash flow. Again, all the way back to 1987 when you had $12 million in the fund. We finished the quarter at $148.2 million. That red line represents the theoretical investment. Like if you just earned the assumed rate of return each year along the way, that $12 million would have turned into 121.9. So the difference between the two is essentially what you outperformed the assumed rate collectively over that period. And then the number down at the bottom shows net cash flow. So you see those bars are negative, almost $40 million. So, over that last kind of 40-year period, you had almost $12 million to begin with. On a net basis, any inflows versus outflows, you spent all of that 12 plus an additional $40 million, yet you've grown your top line up to almost $150 million total market value. I'm going to skip the asset allocation pages for now. We'll come back to that later. Page 21, where everything kind of comes together. So top line, in absolute terms, it was a good quarter. We were up 8.2%. The bad news is the policy was up 9.37, so we underperformed. And you placed in the 66th percentile against the peer group. Fiscal year to date, 7.91% versus 9.45. Couple of big reasons for that. Within the quarter, we did have JP Morgan underperform. That's a pretty conservative sort of value strategy. Value did really well in the quarter, up 13+%. They lagged behind in a way, not surprising. The kind of the income-oriented strategies did not keep up in this big kind of pop in the market. We also, for a portion of the quarter, still had Eaton Vance, the Atlanta Capital. That also continued to drag. Now, we did replace it within the quarter, and the replacement did well, but it was for only a small piece. And then the other one on page 22, DFA, one of our international strategies, was up 4% versus its benchmark of 12.8. So those are kind of the primary sources of that underperformance. Just to give you a sense, essentially everything that, if it did poorly this quarter, it's because it had done well previously. And conversely, the strategies that had underperformed last quarter performed well this quarter. So we had this kind of flip-flop. In July, we had the exact opposite happen again. So just to give you a quick sample, DFA, who is kind of your worst relative performer, they were up 5.4% in the month of July. Euro Pacific was -1, and WCM was -2.5. So again, the sort of flip-flopping between first quarter, second quarter, and then July. So we're seeing a lot of intra-market volatility, different strategies doing well in relatively short periods. Why we diversify, absolutely. Also, just to kind of close the loop, the market value as of today, $149.6 million, which is roughly 1.28% higher than where we were June 30th. July 31st. I modified that. So what that essentially goes back to, if you go back to that fiscal year number, we're sitting at roughly 8.7% or so, kind of back of the envelope math as of today. So again, better than what you see in the reporting there, obviously with about 5+ weeks to go in our fiscal year. No, that's as of today. That 149.6 was this morning. Actually, the market, I think, was up today, so it's actually a little bit better than that. But if I can now, let's take you back to page 17 in the big book. Let me pause. Any questions on managers, strategies, anything that I've covered or anything that I've skipped? I'm trying to go fast. Okay, hearing none. So let's talk about kind of the current allocation. So you can see here, now this is as of June 30th, but it's actually pretty close to accurate. So you see we were 0.5% over in domestic equity. Today that's actually 0.87%. So we're slightly higher than that, but not dramatic. The international equity at June 30th was 2.7. It now sits at 3.09 overweight. So both of the equities have continued to kind of outperform the rest of the portfolio. but it's still relatively consistent with what this graph shows. So relative to the ordinance, right, we have a 65% cap on equity exposure. We're sitting at 63.96% today. So we're under the cap, but essentially only 1% away. So kind of equity. It doesn't delineate, the ordinance just says equity. So the way we have the policy, sort of the investment policy drafted, like right now we're 50% public market, or US. And then we've got private equity sort of earmarked in there, but at 0. But if we funded that at say 2.5%, we would take the 2.5% from domestic to bring it down. So the total equity stayed at 50.
But in practice, that percentage that we're taking out is going to sit in cash for the next 6 months. So,
or you just leave it in and you take it out when you need it.
That's right. So there's kind of two different things, and you raise a very good point. If you decide to enter a new investment, you have to fund it somewhere on paper, right? We're going to take it from fixed income. We're going to take it from cash or equity, what have you. Then, at implementation, it kind of depends on where you are at the time, right? So let's just, on paper, let's say we were going to fund it from fixed income. We're not, but let's just, for the sake of argument. And then a capital call comes in, and you're underweight fixed income, and you're overweight equity. So you take it from equity, even though on paper you were supposed to take it from fixed income, because that's getting back toward target. So with all of that, sorry, not to confuse you too much, but I almost think it's two different decisions. One is, do we want to rebalance today? Then separately, do we want to make commitments, and where should it come from? Because when those capital calls come in down the line, then we will work toward that when those capital calls come in. But I don't think you want to, let's say you say, let's fund 2% and let's take it on domestic equity. You don't just take 2% out of domestic equity, throw it in cash, and wait 3 years or 2 years for that money to be called in. You leave it in the portfolio, hopefully still earning 7, 8, 9% until they call the money, and then you just peel it out as needed. Right. Like I said, the first year, call it roughly 10%, 15% of your committed capital. So it's a few $100,000. So you don't need to set aside multiple millions for what ends up being multiple years.
Well, not that we're in a die-hard situation, but we don't meet again for another quarter, and we have the 45-day window on Taurus. I think the opportunity is right in front of us to take a look at rebalancing. We don't have to, but why not if we're here?
The one thing I would say, the market, generally speaking, is still performing quite nicely. We're not quite at all-time highs, but we're awfully close.
Sure.
But there's a lot of pitfalls out there, and we're bumping up against the cap. So my suggestion would be to peel some of those gains off the table. To put it in dollar terms, we are overweight our target by a collective $5.9 million. So that's the number to get back to 60% target. Okay, we are underweight fixed income by a total of $4 million between the U.S. fixed income and international fixed income. So one thing that I would like to suggest is pull enough out of overweight position in equity at least to get fixed income back to target. The only other real underweight is real estate. We've made some commitments, but again, we're waiting for capital calls. So it's not like we can just push that money in there, right? So we're going to leave a little bit of overweight to equity, a little bit of cash, because we have to be underweight a couple of those areas waiting on capital calls.
How about I'll make the motion that we move to rebalance by basically moving from the equities into the fixed incomes to balance the fixed income. Would still be a little more in equity.
Okay.
So basically move 4 million.
All right, I got a motion on the table to move to rebalance. I need a second.
Do you want individual funds, which is what we've done in the past?
Maybe for the state, if somebody's interested in seconding it, so we can open it for further discussion.
Right.
So yeah, I think if we can, it might make sense to add to the motion if we're willing to kind of choose where that money's coming from.
Okay.
And we have kind of three potential landing sources per what you said. So again, global, we only have one manager in their PIMCO. We're short 300,000. So to me, that one's clean and easy. Then within domestic fixed income, we have Baird and Sawgrass. Baird is the short term. Sawgrass is the longer duration. Interest rates have been going up. Some argument. Question is, do they continue going up or do they head back down the other way? But of that 3.7, right, that, you can do all in one and zero in the other. You can split it, do some combination between them. So sort of 50-50, the 3.7 between Baird and Sawgrass. Okay. And then the other part of that too, so that's at least a proposal for the landing spot in terms of allocating. Where does it come from? Right? And that's primarily international equity is actually the larger piece of 4.6 million is what we're overweight international, and 1.3 million dollars is the actual dollar overweight to domestic. Now again, that's the full 5.9. We're only talking about taking 4, so I would take that down proportionally. If that makes sense. So the 4 million, essentially call it 3 million out of even 3.5 million out of international and 500,000 out of U.S.
How many funds do we have in international?
3 international.
3 international.
DFA and Europac are the bigger pieces.
How many in domestic?
We have 4 different strategies there. So
how about I'll just amend again to say we just split it between those. To the extent we need, so the international is split between the 3 and the.
We're talking the 4 million, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I guess I'm going to lean to you on this one, Brendan. I mean, we obviously have equity that's kind of mildly diversified with the total index, large cap, the JP Morgan, and that new Vanguard we just went into. And I know you don't have your crystal ball, you always seem to leave it at the office.
We just don't tell you, because then you can't tell us we're wrong.
Given, market conditions, is there somewhere where we should shave our gains? I mean, obviously, Winslow, I'm just going back a year. Winslow's been kind of underperforming the benchmark, whereas, the total stock market and the JP Morgan have been there. And I've gone on record several times in saying that a total stock market, I think, is just too broad and too overly pinned on an index fund. I don't like it.
That would be, again, when you just look in dollars, we actually have essentially the most money in JP Morgan and the Vanguard total stock. JP Morgan's the value. The total stock is it's not the S&P 500, but it's close to that. Really more top heavy in terms of nature. So that, considering that's one of the largest positions and it's more top heavy, that would be the first place I'd go. And essentially, we're only talking about taking $500,000 out of that. The larger piece would be international. So I would just take the full $500,000 from Vanguard total stock for the U.S. piece, and then.
So you would recommend the whole amount in domestic equity from the JP?
No, from Vanguard total stock.
Vanguard total stock.
Yeah.
And then the international, you're okay with distributing?
Yes. And the only thing I would say, I would kind of just do it pro rata. So like DFA has 9. Okay. Yeah, like DFA has 9.7 million. Europac is 6.4 and WCM is 2.9. So if you're okay with it, I would just take a proportional, essentially divide it based on the percentages. So they all at the end would have the same kind of split that they do now. I mean, I haven't run the math, but I think you can make the motion to just say proportional split based on the assets. Yeah, I mean, if you want to do it by dollars, that would be pretty close, yeah.
It's probably not perfect, but it's close enough. What's the total dollar?
That was three. Well, sorry, we kind of talked about 3 and 3.5. That was 3 million. We talked about 3.5 because if we do 500 from U.S. and 3.5 from international, that gets us to the 4.
So 3 out of international, $500,000 out of the domestic equity, and then that puts 3.5 in domestic goods. That brings it towards our target number.
Correct.
Okay, I will amend my motion, see if I can get this right.
You make a motion to?
I make a motion to, reduce our international equity by 3 million to do that ratably amongst the funds that make that up.
3.5.
3.5.
3.5. And do that.
Mr. Kleffner, can you turn your mic on?
So I'll start again. So I make a motion that we reduce our exposure in the international equity by 3.5 million, and you do that ratably amongst the funds that make that up. That we reduce our exposure in domestic equity by $500,000, and that comes out of the Vanguard. And we then redeploy that into the fixed income, domestic fixed income, that $4 million, and we do that.
One's like 3.7 million to domestic, and you wanted to split it equally between Baird and Sawgrass, and then 300 PIMCO.
So 3.7 million to domestic fixed income. We split it equally between the two that are in there now, and the other 300,000 into the PIMCO Global Fixed Income.
Quick point of clarification, Mr. Kleffner, you had said from Vanguard. We have 2 Vanguards under domestic equity, so it was the total stock market.
Yes. Total stock market. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, we got a motion. I'm not going to ask you to repeat it. Can we get a second?
I'll second.
Okay, got a motion and a second. We'll take this by board. Madam Clerk, we'll start with the police board.
So moved.
Get a second.
Second.
There you go.
David Cohill,
Yes.
John Patridge,
Yes.
Matthew Grocki,
Yes.
John Castilla,
Yes.
Jason Sharp.
Yes.
And then the fire board?
So moved.
Second.
Take your pick.
That's right.
George Candler,
Yes.
John Wiggins,
Yes.
Lance Hughes,
Yes.
Steve Shadow.
Yes.
And then the general board.
So moved.
Second.
Then first and a second?
Nick Curry,
Yes.
Dan Jansen,
Yes.
Greg Kleffner,
Yes.
Eddie Vergara.
Yes.
All right.
So that essentially gets us pretty close to target. Now the outstanding question is, are we interested in proceeding with private equity? You know, again, because of the nature of our ordinance and the way we have to pull it, target it from equity if you were to proceed. So to me, it would just be a matter of what kind of amount would we be comfortable with. Well, first of all, if we're interested in proceeding, then if so, the amount. Given what we've talked about, a number like 3 million kind of sounds about right to me in terms of a first commitment.
So what's our cap? 2.5%.
That's what's in the policy sort of set aside now.
Right.
Again, that's still under $3 million. So $3 million commitment doesn't get you quite to 2.5%. But again, it'll take time to build up, and then gives you room to kind of make additional commitments.
What number puts us at 2.5%?
Well, we're calling it right at
3.75.
150 million. So,
Oh, what?
but
Right.
Yeah.
when it comes to private investments, it's an art that you're always kind of working and tweaking. You're always a little under, so then you add a commitment, and then you end up being a little over. So the next time you commit a little less, and you can never just say, "Oh, put in 400,000, so I'm exactly on target," because of the nature of the timing of it. But that's why I think, again, $3 million, and then the next time you look at it, we see what all the other investments are doing, and then
Right.
right,
Okay.
and then you say, okay, this time instead of doing 3, we have to commit 4, or we have to commit 2, or whatever.
Sure, I'll make a motion to commit $3 million to Taurus Private Markets.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. We'll go by board. We can start with the general board since we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Sorry. Nick Curry,
Yes.
Dan Jansen,
Yes.
Greg Kleffner,
Yes.
Eddie Vergara.
Yes.
And then the police board.
I'll make a motion to commit $3 million to Taurus.
Second.
David Cahill,
Yes.
John Patrick,
Yes.
Matthew Grocking,
Yes.
John Castillo,
Yes.
Jason Sharp.
Yes.
And then the fire board.
So moved.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, roll call.
George Cantler,
Yes.
John Wiggins,
Yes.
John McDaniel, Lance Hughes,
Yes.
Steve Shadow.
Yes.
Okay, so that is, I mean, essentially, we're in motion. Pedro, if he's still on the line, so he'll kind of get all that going in terms of the process. Then the only kind of outstanding item essentially is formalizing that. I mean, the policy already allows it. We just don't currently target it. But I think because of the nature, we can actually formally approve that sort of target next time because it's going to take a little while to get there. But what I would plan on doing is essentially coming back and targeting effectively 2%, which is about what that $3 million sort of commitment is. But again, it would be sort of a sliding scale. So you don't immediately put 2% in if that makes sense. As the money gets called, we blend it into that target. But I'll bring that for formal, adoption or formal review to actually go ahead and put it in as a target, where right now it's an allowable investment, so we can proceed.
Sure.
But we'll just go ahead and implement that next time, if that's okay.
So you're talking about making revisions to the IPS?
Correct. To just actually put in a target for private equity, because right now the target's 0. It's allowable. We've said we're going to do up to 2.5%.
Correct.
So we can move forward, but in terms of, I think it's good to have a target weighting in there.
No, I think we should have targets. I hate to rehash the discussion about removing the hard guardrails, and I'd like to move to the statutory standard, the prudent investor standard.
Separate discussion, right?
Thought I could sneak it in. All right.
Yeah, until
Dustin left.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'd have to change the ordinance to do what he was referencing. Essentially, what most other cities have is kind of what they call the prudent investor standard.
So
no hard cap on equity exposure. But until that is changed, our ordinance limits us at 65% total. So that's why we have to play.
It doesn't matter, but I would support that because the problem is then you get these really hairy motions and.
Well, before your time, we were selling post-COVID equities that were doing phenomenal. We'll put them into crashing fixed.
To balance, right?
Because we were statutorily required.
Yes, Pedro.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut anybody off. I had a little bit of a hard time. Did the board select 50 South or Taurus?
Taurus.
Okay.
And we only have 45 days to the final close, so we're going to have to unfortunately move quickly.
Yep. Yes, sir. Understood. It should be okay. We've worked with them, so we kind of have everything pretty streamlined. So I'll get everything over to Dustin for execution. And then I guess, will you communicate with Taurus and they'll send me the docs, or do you want me to reach out to them directly? Or?
No, I'll reach out to them and coordinate that for you.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's great.
Okay, then in the interest of time, we'll go to moving for approval of the investment consult. You're done, correct?
I am done.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
That's quite all right.
I got one quick question for
Sure, go fire away.
Percentages. We have target percentages on equity fixed income. Do we have target percentages on these funds? Or is it just
No, we don't individually. I mean, we kind of have the broad, like the Russell 3000 sort of target, and that provides a little bit of a framework, but we don't specifically specify that we want Vanguard Strategic Equity at 5% or 10%. We could do that if we want.
Well, we've never had that discussion then. What we should be at. It's just always kind of a winging it.
I mean, we generally talk about the allocation in terms of the sizing and keep it So just as an example, like within the Russell 3000, small and mid cap represents around 30%. So if we were having a conversation relative to Vanguard Strategic Equity, which is your small and mid cap manager, and it was 75% of your equity exposure, we would probably be having a conversation about that deviation. But most of the time, those kind of recommendations are keeping it relatively consistent there.
Got it.
But we can have that conversation. There are some plans that really like to dial that in at sort of the sub asset class level, but we haven't done that before. But we could if you wanted to. Yeah.
I think we should at some point.
Alrighty, so we're going to move to approve the investment consultant quarterly investment performance report. We can start with the police board.
So moved. Second.
Got a first and a second. Madam Clerk, roll call.
David Cohill,
Yes.
John Patrick,
Yes.
Matthew Grocki,
Yes.
John Castilla,
Yes.
Jason Sharp.
And then the fire board.
Motion to approve the quarterly report.
Second.
We got a first and a second. Madam Clerk, roll call.
George Candler,
Yes.
John Wiggins,
Yes.
Lance Hewish,
Yes.
Steve Shadow.
Yes.
And then the general board.
So moved. Second.
You got a first and a second. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Nick Curry,
Yes.
Dan Jansen,
Yes.
Greg Kleffner,
Yes.
Eddie Vergara.
Yes.
All right. I think we've already covered G, possible action of rebalance. So that's off your mark right there. And then pension administrators reports. Dustin had to leave early, so I don't think we have any information we can glean from that. Unfortunately, he had a conflict. And then let's move on to consideration by General Employees Board of Trustees. For general employees, we need to approve application for retirement. Deborah Deneen, Customer Accounts Manager, Finance, effective 10/1/2026, separation date 9/30/2026, meets age service requirements for normal retirement, 22 years, 8 months of service. Need to get a motion and a second, please.
So motion to approve. Second.
A motion and a second. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Nick Curry,
Yes.
Dan Jansen,
Yes.
Greg Kleffner,
Yes.
Eddie Vergara.
Yes.
All right. And then secondly, we need to approve the application for retirement. Jason Fatides, Director of Parks and Recreation Parks, effective 11/1/2026, separation date 10/15/2026, meets age service requirements for normal retirement, 13 years, 6 months of service. Motion and second, please.
Motion to approve. Second.
And a motion and second. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Nick Curry,
Yes.
Dan Jansen,
Yes.
Greg Kleffner,
Yes.
Eddie Vergara.
Yes.
All right. Third item, we need to approve Cynthia's self-recovery demand payment plan. Need a motion and a second.
Motion. Second.
And a motion and second. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Can we have a little discussion?
Sure.
The only discussion I want is like how we let this go on. Dustin's not here, but we let
Yeah, I've been-
somebody collect for 8 months. And we're being pretty nice to the kids that collected money they shouldn't have
Sure.
collected. I'll just say that. But
Right. Without our
I'm not speaking for Dustin, but I thought 2 years ago we had updated software.
yeah, that's what I thought. We had all this. I agree.
I thought they did a monthly social security.
Yeah.
So,
Wait, was this an overpayment or payment after death? I thought.
Payment after death.
Oh, okay.
For 8 months, I think.
That's right.
right.
I thought. Okay.
That was my only, and I'm fine with proving it because
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I think we had discussed this at the previous meeting as well, didn't we?
I don't remember the specific one. I remember the whole.
Yeah, it was based. The conversation that followed it was the proof of life that they were going to start doing because that they.
So the
implemented
proof
this
of life was after this happened?
Correct.
Okay, then I'm.
Sure.
She's committed to the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking, I didn't see that.
The new software was before
Recovery
this.
demand.
Yeah, I think I saw.
Right.
There were 3 months paid at the monthly rate, and then now they say they don't have enough money, and we're doing it over like 5 years.
Right.
So not paying it back in 8 months, like they got 8 months ago.
All right. We got a motion and a second on the table. Madam Clerk, roll call.
I got you.
Nick Curry,
Yes.
Dan Jansen,
Yes.
Greg Kleffner,
Yes.
Eddie Vergara.
Yes.
All right, and then finally, need approval of motion and a second on informational Walter Webb demand letter.
So moved.
Second.
All right, got a first, second, Madam Clerk, roll call.
Nick Curry,
Yes.
Dan Jansen,
Yes.
Greg Kleffner,
Yes.
Eddie Vergara.
Yes.
All right, any items for discussion amongst any of the boards? Seeing none, we'll move on.
This is, yeah,
Oh.
this is Pedro, and I apologize. I was gonna jump in, but I think you guys took care of it. I just want to make sure that I understood. For the self collection matter, the board did approve the recommended repayment plan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll we'll work with Dustin, but we'll communicate with excuse me. We'll communicate with Mr. Legat and coordinate the payments and everything with Dustin, and then on the I guess on the other demand letter, we'll just follow up again and see if we can get some traction. Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
Okay. Yes.
All right, we good?
We're all good.
All right, courtesy of the Florida visitors, seeing none, and get a motion to adjourn.
Moved.